Hey guys, tonight we're going to leave the safety of the surface world behind and descend into a frontier that is more hostile, more alien, and far less understood than the surface of Mars. Imagine, for a moment, that we are floating directly above the deepest scar in the Earth's crust. Below us lies a chasm so deep that if you dropped Mount Everest into it, the peak would still be covered by 2 kilometers of water. It is a place of crushing pressure, absolute darkness, and creatures that have evolved to survive in a world that would instantly destroy us. But in that darkness, there is life. Life that defies everything we thought we knew about biology. It's a world where animals communicate with flashing lights, where mountains move, and where the seafloor is actually being recycled into the Earth's core. It feels distant, doesn't it? Like a sci-fi movie. But this place is right here, on our home planet, and the water flowing through these trenches is connected to the same ocean currents that lap against your local beach. The monsters down there are, in a very strange way, our neighbors. Thanks to the marvels of titanium engineering and human obsession, tonight we are going to squeeze ourselves into a tiny metal sphere and go there. We are going to the very bottom of the Challenger Deep. Frankly, if you were dropped here without a submersible, you wouldn't survive long enough to even realize you were wet. The physics of this place are actively trying to turn you into a physics equation. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. That small click sends a big signal to the algorithm. That long-form, serious educational content still matters. And to me, it's an incredibly meaningful show of support. Thank you so much for helping keep this channel going strong. It always fascinates me to see where you're all tuning in from. Let me know in the comments where you are in the world and what time it is for you. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing on the heaving deck of a research vessel, roughly 200 miles southwest of Guam. The air is thick, humid, and heavy with the smell of diesel fumes and salt spray. It's a blindingly bright day in the Western Pacific, the kind of day where the sun hammers down on the white paint of the ship until it hurts your eyes to look at anything without sunglasses. Around you, the ocean is a deceptive, tranquil blue, a vast, undulating sheet of sapphire that stretches out to the horizon in every single direction. It looks peaceful. It looks empty. But you know better. You are about to do something that, statistically speaking, is rarer than walking on the moon. While 12 human beings have left their boot prints in the lunar dust, only a tiny handful of souls have ever made the vertical journey to the bottom of the place you are currently bobbing over. You are staring at the interface between two worlds, the world of air and light that humans were built for, and the inner space, the hydrospace, that comprises 99% of the livable volume of our planet. Suspended from the A-frame crane at the stern of the ship is your vehicle. It doesn't look like the spaceships you see in movies. It looks industrial, heavy, and vaguely threatening. It's a vertical torpedo, a towering slab of specialized foam and batteries. But the part that matters to you is the sphere. The pilot's sphere. It's a ball of solid titanium, machined to near-perfect tolerances. This isn't just a vehicle, it's a pressure vessel. It is the only thing that will separate your fragile, turnosoft biology from a weight of water equivalent to an elephant standing on your thumb. You climb the ladder. The entry hatch is barely wide enough for your shoulders. You have to twist, exhale, and slide yourself down into the cavity. Inside, the air is cool and smells faintly of ozone, machine grease, and that specific sterile scent of high-end electronics. It is cramped. If you suffer from claustrophobia, this is the part where you'd start screaming. The interior diameter of the sphere is usually less than 4 feet. You don't sit in a chair, you curl up. You are essentially sitting in a fetal position, surrounded by touchscreens, oxygen scrubbers, and emergency ballast controls. There is a heavy final clank as the hatch is lowered above you. Then comes the sound of the locking wheel spinning, sealing you in. That sound is the psychological severance point. You are no longer part of the surface world. You are now a self-contained ecosystem. A bubble of 1 atmosphere of pressure about to drop into a world of 1,000 atmospheres. Outside, you can hear the muffled shouts of the launch crew and the splash of water against the hull. Then, the crane lifts you. For a moment you are swinging in the air, a pendulum of technology dangling over the abyss. Then, with a rush of bubbles and a lurch that your stomach definitely feels, you drop. The viewports, thick cones of acrylic glass, wash over with white foam, then settle into a brilliant crystalline blue. You are floating. The rocking motion of the waves is still pushing you around, which is arguably the worst part. The heat of the tropical sun is still penetrating the water, keeping the interior temperature relatively high, though condensation is already starting to form on the cold metal walls of the sphere. Geologists and oceanographers still argue about the exact depth of the Challenger deep to the meter, debating variables like gravity anomalies and water density. But right now, the exact number doesn't matter. What matters is that you have 11 kilometers of water beneath your feet. You check your systems. Oxygen flow is steady. CO2 scrubbers are active. The comms check with the surface is crisp, though there's a slight delay that reminds you of the isolation. You reach out and toggle the switch to flood the buoyancy tanks. There is a hiss of escaping air, a sound of water rushing into the ballast chambers, and the rocking motion stops. The bright blue in the viewport shifts slightly as the nose of the sub tips downward. Gravity takes over. The surface of the Pacific Ocean, the roof of the world you are leaving, begins to recede. You are falling. As you descend through the first 100 meters, the water outside is a piercing electric blue. It feels modern, technical, a place for titanium spheres and digital readouts. But to really understand where you are going, you have to let your mind drift back. Back before the screens, before the oxygen scrubbers, before the very idea of tectonic plates existed. You have to go back to 1875 to a wooden ship creaking in the swell of this exact patch of ocean, the HMS Challenger. Imagine the scene on that deck. It wasn't the sterile environment of modern science. It was a place of hemp rope, canvas sails, coal smoke, and sweat. The crew of the Challenger was 3 years into a 4-year circumnavigation of the globe, a mission that effectively invented the science of oceanography. Their method of seeing the bottom was brutally simple and agonizingly labor-intensive. They didn't have sonar. They didn't have radar. They had a lead weight tied to a rope. They would drop this weight over the side and let it fall, feeding out line mile after mile. When the line went slack, they knew they hit bottom. Then, hundreds of sailors would have to haul that wet, heavy hemp rope back up by hand, counting the knots to measure the depth. It was back-breaking work under the tropical sun. On March 23, 1875, they were doing a routine sounding here, about 200 miles off the coast of Guam. They expected the weight to hit the bottom at the usual depth, maybe 3 or 4 kilometers. They watched the rope uncoil. 3 kilometers went by, then 4, then 5. The mood on the deck must have shifted from boredom to confusion, and then to a quiet, creeping dread. 6 kilometers of rope disappeared into the water. 7. 8. You have to remember, in the late 19th century, the deep ocean was the realm of nightmares. It wasn't just unknown, it was mythologically terrifying. Sailors of that era still half believed in the biblical Leviathan, in krakens that could drag ships under, in a seafloor that might just be a bottomless void leading to hell itself. As that rope kept paying out, sliding slick and endless over the gunwale, they weren't just measuring a hole, they were probing the limits of their reality. Finally, the line went slack at 4,475 fathoms, about 8,184 meters. They hadn't found the absolute bottom that we know today, but they had found the abyss. They had discovered that the earth had wrinkles, deep scars hidden beneath the waves that were far deeper than the tallest mountains were high. They named this specific spot the Challenger Deep, unknowingly immortalizing their wooden corvette in the annals of extreme geography. It's a strange feeling, sitting in your high-tech cocoon, realizing that the first people to touch this darkness did so with a piece of rope. They dropped a lead weight into an alien world and pulled it back up, and when they did, the thermometers they sent down came back shattered by the pressure. The glass tubes had been crushed to dust. That was their first clue about the violence of the place you are currently falling into. Today we have replaced the hemp rope with fiber optic cables and acoustic modems. We have replaced the lead weight with syntactic foam and titanium. But the fundamental challenge remains exactly the same. The ocean doesn't care about our technology. The sheer scale of the vertical distance is the same today as it was in 1875. As you watch the depth gauge on your dashboard tick past 150 meters, you are tracing the ghost of that rope. You are following the invisible line dropped by those Victorian sailors. They couldn't possibly comprehend what lay down there. Plate tectonics wouldn't be accepted science for another 90 years. They didn't know that this trench was a recycling plant for the Earth's crust. They just knew they had found a hole in the world. And now, you are falling into it. The blue outside the viewport is deepening, losing its brilliance, turning into a rich, heavy indigo. The surface turbulence is gone. The rocking has stopped. The ship above you is now just a shadow against the sun, and soon it will disappear entirely. You are leaving the world of history and entering the world of physics. In the silence of the sphere, you can almost hear the echo of the Challenger crew's confusion. Why is it so deep? What could possibly be down there? For them, it was a mystery etched in rope and lead. For you, it is a destination. But the fear, that primal lizard brain reaction to the concept of bottomless, is something that technology can muffle, but never quite silence. You check the hatch seal one more time, just to be sure. As you fall deeper, watching the numbers on the depth gauge climb, you need to confront the single most terrifying reality of this journey. It isn't the darkness. It isn't the cold. It isn't even the legendary monsters the Victorian sailors feared. It is the water itself. We tend to think of water as soft, yielding stuff. You jump in a pool, it splashes. You drink it, it flows. But down here, water stops behaving like a liquid and starts behaving like a solid vice. Every 10 meters you descend adds 1 atmosphere of pressure, roughly 14.7 pounds per square inch, to the hull of your sphere. That doesn't sound like much, does it? But do the math. You are heading for 11,000 meters. By the time you reach the bottom, the ocean will be exerting a pressure of over 8 tons per square inch on every single point of this vessel. The standard analogy, which is terrifyingly accurate, is that it's the equivalent of an elephant standing on your thumb, but let's scale that up to the whole sub. Imagine 50 jumbo jets stacked on top of this tiny titanium ball. That is the weight you are voluntarily placing on your head right now. This invisible force is the great filter of deep-sea exploration. It is the reason why we have better maps of the surface of Mars than we do of our own ocean floors. Space is a vacuum. The difference between the inside of a spaceship and the outside is only one atmosphere. It's an easy engineering problem. But here, the difference is 1,000 to 1. The ocean is trying to crush this sphere into a piece of scrap metal the size of a basketball. If you look closely at the seams of the hatch or the thick acrylic of the viewports, you might find yourself thinking about what would happen if something failed. Hollywood movies always get this wrong. In the movies, a leak starts as a high-pressure spray, water jetting in while the hero tries to turn a valve. Reality is much faster and much less forgiving. At these depths, a structural failure doesn't result in a leak. It results in an implosion. The pressure differential is so massive that the water would enter at supersonic speeds. In fact, the air inside the sphere would be compressed so violently and so quickly that it would likely ignite, momentarily creating a flash of heat deeper than the surface of the sun before the water hammered everything into oblivion. The entire event would happen in a fraction of a millisecond. Your brain literally wouldn't have time to process the nerve signal from your eyes to tell you that you were dead. One moment you are a biologist, the next you are physics. This isn't theoretical. In 2014, a state-of-the-art unmanned vehicle called Nereus was exploring the Kermadec Trench, a sister trench to the Mariana. It was designed by the best engineers at Woods Hole. At 10,000 meters, it simply vanished from the telemetry. When the support ship eventually located the debris field, they didn't find a broken robot. They found white confetti. The implosion had shattered high-grade ceramics and syntactic foam into millions of tiny, unrecognizable particles drifting in the current. That is the violence waiting just inches from your face. You shift your weight in the pilot seat, and suddenly the hull makes a sound. Groan. Your heart hits your throat. It's a sharp, metallic pop, followed by a low, creaking sound that seems to come from everywhere at once. Relax. Breathe. This is normal. Well, normal is a relative term. What you are hearing is the titanium sphere actually shrinking. Under the immense load of the ocean, the metal lattice of the hull is being compressed. The diameter of the sphere you are sitting in will actually decrease by several millimeters during the dive. The materials are settling, groaning under the strain, finding their new equilibrium. You are effectively sitting inside a giant, shrieking metal lung that is being squeezed by the fist of a god. It's a psychological game now. You have to trust the math. You have to trust that the engineers who welded these seams had a good day, that there were no microscopic air bubbles in the titanium casting. You are a soft, fragile sack of water and air, protected by a shell that is fighting a war against the entire Pacific Ocean. But as the creaking settles and your pulse slows down, you realize something profound. The water isn't just a weapon. It's a shield. This pressure barrier is what has kept this world isolated for billions of years. It's why the creatures down here look so alien. They have evolved in a pressure cooker that would dissolve the bones of a surface animal. The depth gauge hits 200 meters. The brilliant turquoise of the surface has faded into a deep, rich, royal blue. You are passing through the limit of where most scuba divers can survive. You are leaving the human world behind and entering the epipelagic, the deceptive blue desert. We are now cruising through the epipelagic zone, the top layer of the ocean that stretches from the surface down to about 200 meters. This is the sunlit zone, the only part of the ocean where photosynthesis can occur. Looking out the viewport, you are surrounded by an endless, hypnotic blue. It's beautiful, isn't it? But here's the reality check. That crystal-clear blue water is actually a sign of emptiness. On land, we associate lush life with green forests and vibrant jungles. In the ocean, clear blue water is the equivalent of a desert. The reason the water is so transparent here is that it contains very little particulate matter, very little life. Coastal waters are green and murky because they are choked with algae, plankton, and nutrients run off from the land. But out here, in the middle of the Pacific, far from any continent, the water is starving. Yet in this liquid desert, there is an invisible engine running that is keeping you alive right now. If you could zoom in with a microscope on a single drop of the water sliding past your hull, you would see a chaotic, violent metropolis. This zone is dominated by phytoplankton, microscopic plants drifting in the currents. Specifically, there is a bacteria called Prochlorococcus. You've probably never heard of it, but it is arguably the most important organism on your planet. It is the smallest and most abundant photosynthetic organism on Earth. These tiny invisible specks, floating here in the trillions, are responsible for producing up to 20% of the oxygen in our entire biosphere. Combine them with other ocean phytoplankton, and you realize that every second breath you take, literally 50% of the oxygen in your blood, comes from the ocean, not the rainforests. As you sit in your sealed metal bubble, breathing recycled air, remember that the real lung of the planet is just on the other side of that glass. But it's not peaceful out there. This microscopic world is a battlefield. The phytoplankton are being grazed upon by zooplankton, tiny drifting animals, copepods, and krill. These are the cows of the sea, but they look like armored aliens. Copepods are frantic, jerking little crustaceans with long antennae, and they are the most numerous multicellular animals on Earth. If you weighed all the copepods in the ocean, they would outweigh the entire human population by a massive margin. And hunting them are the arrow worms, translucent predators that look like glass darts, shooting through the water to impale their prey. It is a constant, high-speed war of eating and being eaten, happening on a scale so small you can't see it, but so vast it powers the entire ocean food web. Every tuna, every shark, every whale ultimately depends on the energy captured by these invisible combatants in the sunlit layer. As you continue to sink, watch the color of the water. It's changing. We are passing 150 meters now. The human eye is great at adapting to light levels, so it might not seem obvious at first, but you are losing the spectrum. Water acts as a filter. The first color to disappear is red. If you were to cut your finger right now and hold it up to the window, please don't, the blood wouldn't look red. It would look black. The water has absorbed all the red wavelengths of the sunlight. Next, the oranges and yellows fade away. By the time we hit the bottom of this zone, the world will be entirely monochromatic. We are being stripped of our colors, layer by layer. This is the boundary of the familiar. Up here, life follows the rules we understand. Sunlight equals energy. Eyes work the way eyes are supposed to. Fish look like fish, streamlined, silver, countershaded with dark backs and light bellies to hide from predators above and below. It's the world of Finding Nemo, the world of tuna fisheries and coral reefs. But look down. Below the sub, the blue is deepening into a heavy, bruised purple. The sun, which was a blinding disk just minutes ago, is now a pale, wavering star far above. You are approaching 200 meters. The mesopelagic is waiting. The scientists call it the twilight zone. I call it the place where the rules of biology start to get weird. We are about to cross an invisible line in the water. It's not just a change in light. It's a change in the very fabric of the environment. The temperature is about to crash. The pressure is doubling. And the creatures? The creatures are about to trade their silver scales for cloaking devices and their normal eyes for night vision goggles. Say goodbye to the sun. We won't be seeing it again for a long time. We are now crossing the threshold. The depth gauge reads 200 meters. The bright, familiar world of the surface is officially gone. We have entered the twilight zone, or scientifically, the mesopelagic. The first thing you would notice, if you were outside the sphere, is the shock. Up until now, the water has been relatively warm, heated by the tropical sun to a comfortable 25 or 30 degrees Celsius. But suddenly, you hit the thermocline. It's a barrier of density and temperature, a sharp, invisible cliff in the water column. Within a span of just a few dozen meters, the temperature plummets. It drops from tropical swimming pool to refrigerator almost instantly, stabilizing around 4 degrees Celsius. If you were diving in a standard wetsuit, this is the moment your body would go into thermal shock. The cold here is aggressive. It sucks the heat out of anything living. Inside the sub, you can feel it too. The titanium hull, which is an excellent conductor, is actively refrigerating the air inside the sphere. You might want to reach for that sweater now. The condensation on the walls is getting thicker, dripping down in slow, cold tears behind the instrument panels. But it's not just the temperature. The water itself feels thicker. We are entering the acoustic sweet spot of the ocean, known as the SOFAR channel, sound fixing and ranging. Because of the way temperature and pressure interact at this specific depth, sound waves get trapped in a horizontal layer. They can travel for thousands of kilometers without losing energy. If a whale sings off the coast of Japan, another whale near California can hear it through this channel. It is the internet of the ocean, a planetary-scale telephone line buzzing with clicks, whistles, and moans that our human ears simply aren't evolved to process. The silence inside your sphere is an illusion. Outside, the ocean is screaming with information. Visually, this is the blue hour. The sunlight has been filtered down to a ghostly, weak, azure glow. It's not dark yet, but it's not light either. It's a permanent dusk. And as your eyes adjust to the gloom, you realize the water is no longer empty. It's filling up with snow. Drifting past your viewport are millions of white flakes. It looks exactly like a winter storm in slow motion. This is marine snow, a polite scientific term for biological debris. It's a mix of dead plankton, fecal pellets, soot, dust, and gelatinous mucus from decaying animals, all clumping together and slowly falling toward the bottom. It sounds gross, and frankly it is. But this falling detritus is the lifeblood of the deep. Since there is no sunlight down here for plants to grow, almost every creature we are about to meet relies on this steady rain of leftovers from the surface world. It's a trickle-down economy in the most literal sense. The deep ocean is effectively eating the scraps from the table of the sunlit zone. As we sink deeper toward 500 meters, the shadows lengthen. This is the zone of stealth. The animals here are living in a perpetual game of hide and seek. You can't just be transparent anymore, because silhouetting against the faint light from above would give you away. You can't just be dark, because flashes of bioluminescence would reveal you. So, evolution has gotten creative. The creatures here are flat, mirrored, or red. Why red? Remember the physics of light we talked about? Red light doesn't penetrate this deep. So, if you are red, you appear completely black. You are invisible. It's the perfect camouflage. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a flash. A quick electric blue spark that vanishes as soon as you look at it. Then another, and another. The biology is starting to wake up. We are descending into the most populated layer of the ocean, though you wouldn't know it by looking. The radar and sonar systems on surface ships often get confused here. They see a false bottom, a layer so dense with life that it reflects sound waves, making the ocean look much shallower than it is. For decades, Navy operators in World War II thought the seafloor actually moved. They would see the bottom rise up at night and sink back down during the day. They were wrong. It wasn't the floor moving. It was an army. You are currently floating through the sleeping quarters of the greatest migration on Earth. And as we go deeper, we are going to wake them up. The sonar anomaly I just mentioned, the false bottom that baffled World War II Navy captains, has a name. It's called the Deep Scattering Layer. And right now, at roughly 600 meters down, we are drifting right through the middle of it. If you turn on the external floodlights of the sub, click. The darkness outside instantly transforms into a blizzard of life. It's not just snow anymore. It's fish. Millions of them. But they aren't the fish you recognize. These are lanternfish, or myctophids. They are small, maybe the size of your finger, with large glassy eyes and rows of glowing photophores along their bellies. They look insignificant, don't they? Just tiny, silvery minnows in the dark. But here is a mind-bending statistic. These little guys are widely believed to be the most abundant vertebrates on the planet. If you took every lanternfish in the ocean and put them on a scale, they would weigh more than all the world's fisheries combined, hundreds of millions of tons of biomass. You are looking at the true rulers of the Earth, by sheer numbers. And they are the commuters in the greatest daily migration on the planet. It's called the DL vertical migration. Every single night, as the sun sets on the surface, this entire layer of life, billions of tons of fish, squid, and krill, starts to swim upward. They travel from the safety of this twilight gloom up to the surface waters to feast on the plankton we saw earlier. It is a massive, vertical rush hour. They gorge themselves under the cover of darkness, and then, just before dawn, they retreat back down here into the shadows to avoid being eaten by the tuna, birds, and dolphins that hunt by sight. It's a genius survival strategy. Hide in the dark, commute to the cafeteria. But this commute does something vital for the planet. By eating carbon-rich food at the surface and then pooping it out down here in the deep, these fish are actively pumping carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and locking it away in the ocean depths. They are a planetary cooling system. Without this biological pump, the Earth's climate would be drastically hotter. So, next time you worry about global warming, say a quiet thank you to the humble, ugly little lanternfish swimming past your window. But where there are grazers, there are hunters, and the hunters down here are the stuff of nightmares. Drifting through the school of lanternfish is a shadow. It's long, serpentine, and moves with a disturbing lack of effort. This is the lancet fish. It looks like a prehistoric mistake, a prehistoric barracuda with high dorsal fins like sails and a mouth full of teeth that look like glass needles. They are ambush predators, drifting silently in the current, waiting for a lanternfish to make a mistake. Because food is so scarce down here, remember, only about 5% of the energy from the surface makes it this deep. The predators can't afford to chase their prey. Swimming takes energy. Burning calories is a death sentence if you don't find a meal to replace them. So, the strategy here is float and wait. The lancetfish has watery, flabby muscles. It doesn't have the hard, red meat of a tuna. It's built for one sudden, explosive burst of speed. And then, nothing. It's the biological equivalent of a coiled spring. It can go for weeks without eating, drifting in a low-energy torpor, just waiting for a vibration, a scent, or a flash of light. And speaking of light, look closely at the lanternfish again. Those glowing spots on their bellies aren't just for decoration. They are high-tech camouflage. In the twilight zone, the biggest danger comes from below. If a predator is looking up, your silhouette blocks the faint sunlight filtering down from the surface. You appear as a dark shadow against a lighter gray background. A perfect target. So the lanternfish uses a trick called counter-illumination. It adjusts the brightness of the lights on its belly to perfectly match the intensity of the sunlight coming from above. By emitting light downwards, it erases its own shadow. It becomes invisible to anything looking up. It is a Klingon cloaking device made of biology. But the arms race of evolution never stops. Some predators have evolved eyes with yellow lenses that can filter out the specific wavelength of the lanternfish's camouflage, revealing the shadow anyway. It is a constant, silent war of optics, played out in the gloom. As we drift deeper, the faint grey light of the sun is finally extinguished. The blue fades to black. We are approaching 1,000 meters. The midnight zone. From here on out, the only light we will see is the light that life makes itself. We have crossed the line, 1,000 meters down. We are now officially in the bathypelagic zone, better known as the midnight zone. The sun is gone. If you were to turn off the internal lights of the submersible, you would be sitting in the purest black imaginable. It is a darkness so complete that it feels heavy, as if the water itself has turned into ink. But as your eyes strain against the blackness, you realize something incredible. The ocean isn't dead. It's sparkling. Everywhere you look, there are faint, ghostly pulses of light. Blue flashes, green glows, sudden sparks that streak away like underwater fireworks. This is bioluminescence, the language of the deep. Down here, roughly 90% of all animals produce their own light. In a world without the sun, life has decided to make its own stars. The chemistry behind this is fascinating. It's a reaction between a molecule called luciferin and an enzyme called luciferase. When they mix with oxygen, they produce a cold light, light with almost no heat. If a standard light bulb is 10% light and 90% heat, this biological light is nearly 100% efficient. It is a level of engineering that human technology is still trying to replicate. But why light up in the dark? Doesn't that just make you a target? Well, yes. But in the midnight zone, light is a tool with 1,000 uses. We talked about counter-illumination, the defensive cloak. But look over there. See that faint, steady glow? That's a lure. But look closer at the shadow lurking behind it. That is the stoplight loosejaw. It is a terrifyingly specialized hunter. Most fish down here can only see blue light because blue travels the furthest through water. Evolution has tuned their eyes to that specific wavelength. But the loosejaw has a superpower. It produces red light. Remember, red light is invisible in the deep ocean. It is absorbed instantly. So, almost no deep-sea creature has eyes capable of seeing red. They don't need to. There's nothing red to see. Except for the loosejaw. It has a special organ under its eye that emits a beam of red bioluminescence, like a sniper using night vision goggles. It can shine this red spotlight on its prey, seeing them perfectly. while the prey remains in total darkness, completely unaware they are being watched. It is the ultimate stealth advantage. And then there is the burglar alarm. Imagine you are a fragile, gelatinous jellyfish floating in the dark. A shrimp attacks you. You have no teeth, no shell, no speed. What do? You scream. But not with sound, with light. The jellyfish explodes into a strobing, spinning wheel of brilliant blue light. It flashes like a police siren. Why? It's trying to attract something bigger than the shrimp. It wants to summon a giant squid or a large fish from hundreds of meters away. The message is simple. Hey, big predator, there is a tasty shrimp right here. Come eat it. The jellyfish bets its life that the giant predator will eat the shrimp and ignore the jelly. It is a high-stakes gamble, weaponizing the hunger of the abyss against your immediate enemy. The darkness here is thick with these silent conversations. Mating signals, warnings, traps, and screams for help, all flashing in a code we are only just beginning to decipher. Suddenly, a shape glides past your viewport, illuminated only by the faint glow of the instrument panel. It's hideous. It looks like a rotting black ribbon with teeth. This is the dragonfish. It's a nightmare of efficiency. Its skin is so black that it absorbs 99.5% of all light that hits it. It is ultra-black matter. Even if you shined a flashlight directly on it, it would look like a two-dimensional hole in the water. And those teeth? They are transparent. They are made of a nanoscale crystal structure that makes them invisible in the water. The prey doesn't see the predator. It doesn't even see the teeth. It just feels the snap. The dragonfish also has a glowing barbell, a long, fleshy whisker hanging from its chin with a light on the end. It twitches this lure, mimicking a small, dying worm, when a curious fish comes to investigate the free meal. Snap. The dragonfish has a hinge in its skull that allows its head to tilt back nearly 90 degrees, opening a mouth that is terrifyingly wide. It engulfs prey that should be too big to fit. This is the recurring theme of the midnight zone. The mouth is always the most important part of the body. Food is so rare that if you find it, you must be able to eat it. You can't be picky. You can't say, "Oh, that's too big." You unhinge your jaw, you expand your stomach, and you swallow. As we descend past 1,200 meters, the bioluminescence seems to get more sparse, more deliberate. The playful sparkling of the upper layers is gone. The lights here are lonely beacons in a vast, silent void. We are entering the realm of the true monsters, the creatures that have haunted sailors' dreams for centuries. Keep your eyes on the window. You might just see the most famous silhouette of the deep. As we drift deeper into this vertical wilderness, you might expect the ruler of this kingdom to be something massive, a great white shark adapted to the dark, or perhaps a sea serpent from a medieval map. But nature, with its infinite sense of irony, has decided that the dominant species down here should be the size of a sardine and look like a burnt matchstick. Meet the bristlemouth. If you look out the window now, you won't just see one. If the lights were strong enough, you'd see millions. This tiny, black, terrifyingly ugly fish is widely considered the most abundant vertebrate on planet Earth. There are more of them than there are chickens, rats, or humans combined. In fact, some biologists estimate there are quadrillions of them. If you were to telepathically sum up the average experience of being a vertebrate on Earth, you wouldn't be a human commuting to work. You'd be a bristlemouth floating in the cold dark, waiting for a piece of dead shrimp to fall on your face. They aren't much to look at. just a large, gaping jaw attached to a scrawny black body. But their success proves a vital rule of the deep. You don't need to be pretty, and you don't need to be smart. You just need to be efficient. They are the ultimate minimalists, stripping away everything that costs energy to maintain, leaving only a mouth and a stomach. But if the bristlemouth is the peasant of this kingdom, the viperfish is its executioner. A long silver ribbon glides into the beam of our external lights. It's the Pacific viperfish, and it possesses a set of dental hardware that is frankly ridiculous. Its teeth are so long and needle-like that they don't actually fit inside its mouth. If it tried to close its jaws normally, it would impale its own brain. So, evolution came up with a gruesome workaround. When the viperfish closes its mouth, the bottom teeth slide up the outside of the upper jaw, curving back toward its eyes. It effectively imprisons its prey in a cage made of teeth. It doesn't chew. It just slams this portcullis shut. The first thing the prey feels is the jail cell locking. The second thing it feels is being swallowed whole. The viperfish also possesses a specialized shock absorber in its neck. When it strikes, it hits with such velocity that without this biological bumper, it would snap its own spine. It is a creature living on the very edge of its own physical limitations, a glass cannon designed for one thing, the kill. But for sheer brute force horror, nothing beats the fang-tooth. Ideally named Anoplodaster cornuta, or dagger-toothed, this fish looks less like an animal and more like a swimming skull. Unlike the long, slender viperfish, the fang-tooth is a compact nugget of muscle and armor. It has the largest teeth relative to body size of any fish in the ocean. Imagine a bulldog, but the bulldog is made of sandpaper and has sabers sticking out of its mouth. The fang-tooth is a tank. While other deep-sea creatures are gelatinous and fragile to save energy, the fang-tooth is rugged. It's one of the few creatures that hunts actively, prowling the depths rather than just floating and waiting. And it's tough. Fang-tooths have been found as deep as 5,000 meters, surviving pressures that would turn a submarine into a soda can. Yet they can also be kept alive in surface aquariums, if you keep the water cold enough, which implies their physiology is incredibly robust compared to their fragile neighbors. So, how do you survive in a neighborhood where the neighbors look like that? You get better at looking? Evolution in the Twilight Zone has produced some of the strangest eyes in history. Take a look at the hatchetfish swimming past. It looks like it's permanently terrified, and for good reason. But look at its eyes. They aren't on the sides of its head. They are on top, fixed in an upward stare. These are called tubular eyes. Imagine walking around with a pair of high-powered binoculars superglued to your face, pointing permanently at the sky. That is the life of a hatchetfish. They have surrendered their peripheral vision entirely for one specific advantage: seeing silhouettes. They spend their entire lives staring upward, scanning the faint, dying light from the surface, looking for the telltale shadow of food or a predator. Some species have taken this optical obsession even further. The barrel-eye fish has a transparent head, literally a see-through dome of fluid, with two green rotating orbs inside that look like marbles. Those marbles are its eyes. It looks through its own skull to track prey. It's a design that makes absolutely no sense in the sane world of the surface. But down here, where the difference between eating and starving is catching a single photon of light, it's a masterpiece of engineering. As we sink past the domain of these optical oddities, the water pressure outside is now approaching 100 atmospheres. The sphere is creaking again, a gentle reminder that we are trespassers here. The creatures outside are built of water. They don't feel the squeeze. But we are bringing a bubble of air into a world of rock-hard water. And just when you think biology can't get any weirder than a fish with a transparent head, the ocean says, "Hold my beer." We are about to enter the midnight zone proper, and we are going to meet the jelly-bodied nightmares that rule the dark. We are now passing 1,000 meters. If you're checking the dashboard, you'll see the depth readout ticking steadily upward. But the more important change is happening outside. We have officially entered the bathypelagic zone. The name comes from the Greek bathys, meaning deep. But I prefer the colloquial name, the midnight zone. This is the largest habitat on Earth. Think about that. The forests, the plains, the deserts, the surface oceans, all of that is just a thin skin on the planet. The midnight zone is the bulk of the biosphere. It is a world of permanent, unrelenting darkness. The sun has not touched this water for millions of years. Down here, the rules of the game change completely. In the twilight zone above, eyes were still useful for spotting silhouettes. Here, in absolute blackness, sight becomes a secondary sense. The primary sense becomes pressure. Most fish down here have an enlarged lateral line, a sensory system running down their sides that detects changes in water pressure. They can feel a predator moving 10 meters away just by the displacement of the water. They live in a 3D map of vibrations. If you moved your hand in the water outside, which again would be fatal, every creature within 50 feet would instantly know exactly where you are, how big you are, and how fast you are moving without ever seeing you. And contrary to what you might think, this dark world isn't silent. It is filled with acoustic ghosts. Sound travels faster and further in dense, cold water. If we turned on the hydrophones, you might hear the click of a sperm whale hunting kilometers away, sounding like a rifle shot. You might hear the tectonic groan of the earth shifting, or the sharp snap of a shrimp. It's a dark room filled with whispers and sudden shouts. But there is a calmness here, too, a slowness. This is a low-energy ecosystem. Food is incredibly scarce. A meal might only come along once a month or once a year. So the metabolism of the residents has slowed to a crawl. They move in slow motion. They drift. They don't chase. They ambush. And the queen of the ambush is waiting for us. If you look closely into the blackness, you might see a faint, lonely point of light bobbing in the void. It looks inviting, doesn't it? Like a tiny candle in a dark room. That is the Eska, the lure of the deep-sea anglerfish. She is the icon of the deep. A globular, misshapen blob of black skin and muscle with a mouth that looks like a bear trap. She is practically blind, sluggish, and ugly. But she doesn't need speed. She has patience. She hangs motionless in the water column, dangling that glowing lure just in front of her jaws. The light is produced by bioluminescent bacteria living inside the bulb. A symbiotic relationship. The bacteria get a safe home. The anglerfish gets a fishing rod. Small fish and crustaceans in the dark see this light and think, "Oh, food!" They swim closer, closer, and then, snap! The vacuum created by her opening jaws sucks them in so fast the human eye would miss it. But the most bizarre thing about the anglerfish isn't her hunting, it's her love life. For decades, scientists were baffled. They would catch these anglerfish in nets, but they were all female. Every single one. They couldn't find a male. They would sometimes find these tiny, parasitic-looking fish stuck to the females, but they assumed they were just Parasites. They were wrong. Those parasites were the men. In the vast darkness of the midnight zone, finding a mate is statistically almost impossible. You could swim for a lifetime and never meet another of your species. So, evolution came up with a desperate solution: sexual parasitism. The male anglerfish is tiny, sometimes barely a centimeter long. He has no lure, no big mouth. He has only one goal: find a female. He has massive nostrils, relative to his size, to sniff out her pheromones in the water. When he finds her, he doesn't court her. He bites her. He latches onto her belly with his teeth and refuses to let go. And then, something straight out of a horror movie happens. He releases an enzyme that dissolves his mouth and her skin, fusing them together. Their blood vessels merge. He physically becomes part of her body. Over time, his eyes atrophy. His fins fall off. His internal organs wither away until he is nothing more than a pair of testes attached to her flank, sustained entirely by her blood supply. She becomes a hermaphrodite, carrying a sperm bank on her hip for the rest of her life. She can carry multiple males at once. Some females have been found with up to 8 husbands fused to their bodies. It sounds nightmarish to us. But down here, where loneliness is lethal, it is the ultimate commitment. Till death do us part is taken literally. As we drift past this tragic, beautiful couple, the water outside seems to thicken with jelly. We are leaving the realm of the fish and entering the wilderness of the invertebrates, the creatures that don't need bones, the creatures that are mostly water themselves. As we continue our descent, the landscape outside the viewport changes. We are leaving the fishy part of the ocean and entering a world that looks like it was drawn by an abstract artist with a fetish for mucus. Welcome to the gelatinous wilderness! Up here on land, we are obsessed with skeletons. We think bones are essential. You need a spine to stand up, ribs to protect your lungs, a skull to keep your brain from getting squished. But down here, bones are a liability. They are heavy, they are energetically expensive to grow, and under extreme pressure, they are brittle. The solution? Be water. Most of the biomass in the deep ocean isn't made of muscle and bone. It's made of hydrostatically pressurized jelly. These creatures match the density of the water around them perfectly. They don't need to fight gravity because they are, effectively, part of the water column. They don't feel the crushing pressure for the same reason a water balloon doesn't pop if you lower it into the deep. The pressure inside matches the pressure outside. Look at that long white ribbon drifting past the lights. It looks like a piece of festive tinsel dropped from a boat, or maybe a very long, very confused intestine. That is a siphonophore! And here is the mind-bending part. It isn't an animal. It's a city. A siphonophore is a colonial organism. It is made up of thousands of individual distinct bodies called zooids. These aren't just cells, they are multicellular units that function like organs. But unlike your organs, which are stuck inside you, these guys are attached in a long chain. And they have specialized jobs. At the top, you have the pneumatophore, or the float, the bus driver. Below that, you have the nectophores, the engine room, pulsing to propel the colony. Further down, you have the gastrozoids, the mouths that eat. And then the dactylozoids, the soldiers, armed with toxic tentacles to snag prey. They are all genetically identical, clones of the same embryo, yet they look and act completely different. It's as if your finger decided to detach, grow a stomach, and start feeding your toes. The Praia dubia, one of the giant siphonophores, can grow up to 40 meters long. That's longer than a blue whale. Imagine a living, stinging fishing net longer than a basketball court, drifting silently in the dark. It's a hive mind floating in the abyss. But if the siphonophores are the cities, the ctenophores, or comb jellies, are the disco balls. Drifting near the window is a small, walnut-shaped blob. Suddenly it lights up with a pulsating rainbow of colors, reds, greens, blues, running down its sides like LED strips. You might think this is bioluminescence again, but it's not. This is physics showing off. Comb jellies have tiny hair-like structures called cilia that they beat rhythmically to swim. These cilia are arranged in rows like the teeth of a comb. As they beat, they diffract the light from our submersible, splitting it into a spectrum just like a prism. You are looking at a biological diffraction grating. Scientists still argue whether sea ctenophores are the oldest animals on Earth, predating even sponges. Some genetic evidence suggests they might have evolved their nervous systems completely independently from every other animal on the planet. Aliens that evolved right here. They are beautiful, ancient, and seemingly harmless. Unless, of course, you are a copepod, in which case they are a gaping maw of sticky tentacles. But the true horror of the gelatinous zone is a creature that is much smaller and infinitely meaner. Squint into the dark. You see that tiny, transparent barrel floating there? Inside it, you can see a little creature with huge eyes and nasty-looking claws, paddling away like a kid in a bumper car. That is Phronima. And if it looks familiar, that's because it has a very famous legacy. Hollywood legend holds that this tiny crustacean was the visual inspiration for the queen alien in the Alien franchise. Look at the elongated head, the double jaws, the spindly, villainous limbs. The resemblance is uncanny. But the way Phronima lives is actually worse than the movie. Phronima is a parasitoid. It finds a salp, a gentle, barrel-shaped gelatinous creature that floats around filtering water. Phronima attacks the salp and eats its insides while it is still alive. It hollows the salp out, turning the victim's body into a hollow, transparent barrel. Then, the Phronima climbs inside the corpse. It uses the hollowed-out body as a house and a vehicle. The female Phronima will lay her eggs inside the barrel, pushing her pram through the water, protected by the gelatinous walls of her victim. Her babies will hatch and snack on the remaining bits of the house before swimming off to find their own victims. It is a level of gruesome pragmatism that makes you appreciate being a human. Down here, a neighbor isn't a friend. A neighbor is just a potential mobile home. As we leave the jelly layer, check the depth gauge. We are passing 2,000 meters. The pressure is now 200 times what it is at sea level. The water is getting colder, barely above freezing. And strangely, the animals are starting to get bigger. You might expect life to get smaller as food gets scarcer. And usually you'd be right. But in the deep ocean, there is a rule called deep-sea gigantism. For reasons we are still trying to fully understand, things down here tend to grow to monstrous proportions. We are about to enter the land of the giants. We are now deep in the midnight zone, drifting past the 2,500-meter mark. The pressure outside is immense, enough to crush a diesel engine block into a paperweight. And yet, looking out into the gloom, you spot a shadow that seems impossibly large. Logic dictates that in a place with very little food, animals should be small. Being big requires calories, right? A lion needs to eat a lot more than a house cat. So, in a desert like this, you'd expect the inhabitants to be microscopic. But the deep ocean likes to break rules. It follows a strange phenomenon known as abyssal gigantism. For reasons that biologists are still arguing over, Invertebrates down here tend to grow to terrifying proportions. One leading theory links it to the temperature. This water is near freezing. In such cold conditions, metabolic rates drop through the floor. Animals here live in slow motion. They grow very slowly, but they also live for a very, very long time. And because there are so few predators big enough to eat them, they just keep growing. Another theory suggests it's about efficiency. A larger animal can travel further on a single tank of gas. If the next meal is 10 miles away, being a giant allows you to cruise there without starving to death. Being big down here isn't about power, it's about endurance. It's the difference between a sports car and a long-haul trucker. To see this in action, look at the sediment accumulating on the ridge below us. See that pale, purplish armored tank crawling through the mud? That is Bathynomus giganteus, the giant isopod. If you've ever turned over a damp rock in your garden, you've seen its cousin, the pillbug, or roly-poly. On land, they are cute little guys barely the size of a fingernail. Down here, they are the size of a cat. Imagine a woodlouse that requires 2 hands to hold. It has 14 legs, a reflective compound eye that glows like a kaleidoscope, and a hard, chitinous shell. They are the scavengers of the deep, the underwater vultures. They patrol the seafloor waiting for marine snow or the occasional windfall of a dead fish. But their superpower is patience. Giant isopods are the undisputed champions of the waiting game. They can go for 5 years without a single meal. 5 years. Imagine eating a sandwich in 2020 and not eating again until 2025. They sit in a state of suspended animation, barely burning a calorie. But when food does arrive, say a dead whale, they transform. They gorge themselves so violently that they physically cannot move afterwards. They fill their stomachs until their legs can no longer touch the ground, and they just roll over, bloated and happy, to digest for the next few years. But if the isopod is the tank of the deep, the next giant is the dragon. Floating in the distance, illuminated by our spot beam, is a ribbon of silver. It's vertical, hanging in the water column like a shiny metallic pole. But as we get closer, you see the red crest on its head. You see the undulating dorsal fin running the entire length of its body. This is the giant oarfish, the king of herrings. They can grow up to 8 meters long. That's roughly 26 feet. They are the longest bony fish alive. For centuries, sailors would see these creatures washing up on shores or swimming near the surface when they were sick, and their minds would instantly jump to sea serpent. If you look at old medieval maps with dragons coiling around ships, this is likely what they were drawing. But the reality is stranger than the myth. The oarfish doesn't swim like a snake. It doesn't undulate side to side. It hangs vertically in the water, head up, tail down, motionless. It uses its long dorsal fin to stabilize itself, drifting silently in the currents, waiting for krill to bump into it. It's not a monster. It's a giant, shiny drift net. And finally, crawling out of the darkness on legs that look like scaffolding, is the Japanese spider crab. If you have arachnophobia, look away now. This is a crustacean that spans nearly 4 meters from claw to claw. You could park a small car underneath it. It is the largest arthropod on Earth. It walks with a slow, deliberate, stilt-like gait. Why the long legs? Well, look at the floor. The bottom of the deep ocean is often covered in a thick, soft ooze. Thousands of years of accumulated dust and detritus. If the crab had short legs, its body would drag in the mud, stirring up clouds of silt and suffocating it. The long legs keep its main body suspended high above the muck, allowing it to pick through the sediment with delicate, surgical precision. These giants are ancient. It's believed they can live for up to a century. They are the silent sentinels of the deep, wandering the darkness long before you were born, and they will likely be wandering it long after you are gone. But being big has a downside. You are a big target. And in a world where everyone is hungry, you need to defend yourself. Or you need to have a mouth that is even bigger than the things trying to eat you. As we leave the land of the giants, we are entering the zone of the great swallowers. Down here, table manners don't exist. If it fits in the mouth, and even if it doesn't, it's dinner. If the giants we just saw were defined by their armor and their endurance, the next group of residents is defined by a single, overriding obsession: gluttony. We are drifting deeper still, and the competition for food is becoming desperate. In the midnight zone, a meal isn't a daily occurrence, it's a lottery win. You might swim for weeks, months, even years without encountering anything edible. So, evolution has hardwired a very simple rule into the brains of these fish. If you find food, you eat all of it, no matter how big it is. Floating into our lights now is a creature that looks like a physiological joke. It appears to be a giant black umbrella attached to a tiny wriggling whip of a tail. This is Eurypharynx pelecanoides, commonly known as the pelican eel, or the gulper eel. It's hard to even call it a fish. Its head is roughly a quarter of its total body length. Its jaws are hinged in such a ludicrous way that they can swing open to create a mouth much wider than the eel's own body. It doesn't really bite prey, it engulfs it. It swims into a school of shrimp or small fish with its mouth open like a cargo bay door, scooping up everything in its path along with a massive amount of water. Once the catch is inside, it forces the water out through its gills and swallows the solids. It's less of a hunter and more of a living, swimming fishing net. But look at the tail. At the very tip, there is a tiny, pinkish-red bioluminescent organ. In the ink-black water, this glows like a distress flare. The pelican eel uses it with devious simplicity. It might wiggle the tail right in front of its own massive, open mouth. A curious crustacean sees the pretty pink light, swims over to investigate, and gulp! The umbrella snaps shut. But if the pelican eel looks like a cartoon character, the next creature looks like a crime scene photo. Meet the black swallower, Chiasmodon niger. It's a small fish, usually only about 25 centimeters long. It looks fairly normal, until it eats. The black swallower has a stomach that is essentially a bag of elastic rubber. It can distend to enormous proportions, allowing the fish to swallow prey that is twice its length and 10 times its mass. Imagine you sitting down to dinner and eating a whole cow in one bite. That is the scale of consumption we are talking about. We know about these fish, not because we catch them down here often, but because of a gruesome flaw in their strategy. Sometimes they bite off more than they can chew. Literally. If a black swallower eats a fish that is too big, a ticking clock starts. Digestion in the cold, deep ocean is a slow process. If the prey is massive, the stomach acids can't break it down fast enough. The dead fish inside the stomach starts to rot before it can be digested. As the prey decomposes, it releases gas. This gas inflates the swallower's stomach like a balloon. The fish becomes buoyant. It starts to float uncontrollably upward. It struggles, fighting to swim down, but the physics of the gas bubble win. It is dragged, kicking and screaming, all the way from the abyss to the surface. When marine biologists find black swallowers washing up on beaches or floating dead on the waves, they almost always have a grotesque, transparent belly, stretched so thin you can see the perfectly intact body of the victim inside. The predator died of indigestion. It is a gruesome way to go, killed by your own last meal. But why take the risk? Why eat something that might kill you? Because down here, you don't have the luxury of choice. You can't look at a massive squid and say, "I'm not that hungry." If you pass up a meal today, you might starve to death before another one comes along. The evolutionary logic is brutal. It is better to risk death by gluttony than to accept death by starvation. So everything down here is built to stretch, to expand, to unhinge. The skeletons are reduced, the skin is loose, the stomachs are expansive. It is a world of biological baggage handlers, waiting for the one suitcase that will keep them alive for the next 6 months. Suddenly, the sonar pings. A loud, rhythmic click echoes through the water. It's not the random noise of the deep. It's powerful, rhythmic, like a hammer hitting an anvil. Click, click, click. Something else is down here with us, something that doesn't belong. An intruder from the surface world is diving into the dark, holding its breath, hunting for monsters. And it is heading straight for us. That sound, click, 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 isn't a machine. It's a heartbeat. Or rather, it's a weaponized voice. Out of the gloom above us, a shape materializes. It is colossal, a grey, wrinkled block of muscle plummeting through the water column like a falling building. It ignores the pressure. It ignores the cold. It is an air-breathing mammal, an alien to this world just like us, yet it is diving straight into hell without a metal shell to protect it. It is a sperm whale. You have to appreciate the sheer biological audacity of this animal. We are sitting here shivering in a titanium sphere with walls 5 inches thick, terrified that a single hairline crack will turn us into instant soup. This whale is doing the exact same dive in its birthday suit. How? Why doesn't it implode like the Nereus robot we talked about earlier? The secret is in the ribs. If you or I tried to free dive this deep, aside from drowning instantly, our rib cages would snap under the pressure, puncturing our lungs. The sperm whale has evolved a rib cage that is flexible. It is designed to snap, or rather, to fold. As the water pressure increases, the whale's ribs collapse inward, compressing its lungs until they are completely flat. By collapsing its lungs, the whale forces all the air out of the alveoli, the gas exchange sacs, and into the reinforced upper airways. This prevents nitrogen from dissolving into the blood, which saves the whale from getting the bends, or nitrogen narcosis. It essentially shuts down its air pockets and becomes a solid, fluid-filled object. And as we know, solids are much harder to crush than air pockets. But look at that massive, boxy forehead. That isn't brain. That is the spermaceti organ. Inside that giant nose is a tank holding hundreds of gallons of a waxy liquid oil called spermaceti. For centuries, humans hunted these whales to put that oil in lamps and candles, a tragic waste of one of nature's most sophisticated engineering systems. Biologists believe this organ acts like a variable buoyancy control. When the whale wants to dive, it circulates cold water through its nose, cooling the wax. The wax solidifies and shrinks, becoming denser. This makes the whale's head heavy, pulling it down into the abyss with almost no effort. It saves energy. It doesn't have to swim down. It just turns into a sinking stone. When it wants to rise, it pumps warm blood to the nose, melting the wax. The liquid expands, becomes lighter than water, and helps lift the giant back to the surface. It is a hydraulic elevator system made of fat. But right now, this whale isn't thinking about buoyancy. It is thinking about murder. The clicks you are hearing are the loudest sounds made by any biological organism on Earth. A jet engine at takeoff is about 140 decibels. These clicks can reach 230 decibels. Sound is different underwater. It hits harder. If you were swimming outside the sub right now, exposed, and this whale clicked directly at you from close range, the sound waves would be so powerful they could actually vibrate your body to death. The acoustic pressure would overheat your tissues. It is a sonic cannon. The whale uses this sound for echolocation, sending pulses into the dark and listening for the echo to bounce back. It is building a 3D acoustic map of the void. It can see a squid from hundreds of meters away, but there is a fringe theory, the acoustic stun hypothesis, that suggests the whale might use these clicks offensively. Some scientists argue that the whale can focus the sound beam so tightly that it physically stuns its prey, blasting the squid with a sonic boom that leaves it paralyzed and ready to be eaten. It's a controversial idea, but when you hear that sound rattling the bolts of your submersible, it doesn't feel far-fetched. Watch the whale closely. It has leveled off. It is scanning. Its heart, which was beating normally at the surface, has slowed down to just a few beats per minute to conserve oxygen. It is running on batteries, holding its breath for a dive that could last 90 minutes. Think about that anxiety. You are 2 kilometers underwater. You are holding your breath. You are hunting a monster that can fight back. And you know that if you stay down here just 1 minute too long, you will drown in the darkness before you can reach the light. Suddenly the whale turns. It accelerates. It has found something. The clicks speed up, merging into a buzz. What scientists call the creak. It sounds like a squeaky door hinge opening rapidly. This means the target is close. The lock is engaged. The whale dives deeper, disappearing into the black beneath us. It is heading for a battle that has been waged in these depths since before humans walked upright. The Leviathan versus the Kraken. And if we follow it, we might just see the thing that nightmares are made of. We follow the whale. The depth gauge is now reading numbers that make your chest tighten just looking at them. We are deep in the midnight zone, a place where the water pressure is around 2 tons per square inch. And here, in the spotlight of the sperm whale's echolocation, the darkness finally gives up its ghost. Emerging from the gloom is a creature that has terrified humanity for as long as we have sailed the seas. The Norse called it the Kraken. The Greeks called it Scylla. Science calls it Architeuthis dux, the ruling squid. First, let's dispel the movie myths. It doesn't drift on the surface attacking ships. It lives down here in the crushing dark. And it is massive. We are talking about an animal that can grow to the length of a school bus, around 12 to 13 meters. Its body is a deep, angry, metallic red, a color that makes it invisible in the deep ocean. But the first thing that locks your gaze isn't the tentacles. It's the eye. The eye of a giant squid is the size of a dinner plate, or even a soccer ball. It is the largest eye in the animal kingdom. Why? Why invest so much biological energy in a massive visual organ in a world with no sunlight? It's not to see the whale itself. A dark whale in dark water is invisible. The squid's eye is designed to see bioluminescence. Remember the burglar alarm jellies we passed earlier? When a massive object like a sperm whale moves through the water, it disturbs millions of tiny bioluminescent organisms, creating a faint, sparkling wake of fairy dust. Around it, The giant squid's massive eye is built to detect that faint halo of light moving toward it. It is watching the shape of the silence being broken. But the whale has already found it. The sonic creak of the echolocation has turned into a buzz. The whale accelerates. The squid reacts. And this is where you see the difference between a squid and an octopus. An octopus has 8 arms. A squid has 8 arms plus 2 feeding tentacles. These 2 extra limbs are much longer than the others, shooting out like elastic bungee cords. At the ends, they widen into clubs covered in suction cups. But these aren't the rubbery, harmless suckers you see on a kitchen octopus. Look closer. The suction cups of the giant squid are lined with rings of sharp, serrated chitin. They are essentially circular saw blades made of fingernail material. The squid lashes out. It isn't trying to eat the whale. That's suicide. It's fighting for its life. The tentacles slap against the whale's thick, grey skin, and the suction cups latch on. The serrated rings dig in, ripping the flesh. This is why we know these battles happen. We rarely see them. In fact, no human has ever witnessed a full-blown fight between a healthy adult whale and a giant squid in the deep. But the evidence is etched into the whale's skin. Almost every adult sperm whale is covered in circular scars. They are the battle tattoos from these deep-sea brawls. Some scars are fresh and bloody, others are faded white circles the size of frisbees, hinting at squids far larger than any we have ever caught. The whale slams into the squid. It's a clash of titans, the mammal with the crushing jaw versus the mollusk with the tearing arms. The squid has one final weapon, its beak. Buried in the center of that mass of writhing arms is a beak made of hard chitin, shaped exactly like a parrot's beak, but the size of a human hand. It is powerful enough to snap a steel cable. If the squid can pull the whale's sensitive nose close enough, it will bite. But the whale has mass on its side, and gravity, and a jaw filled with conical teeth. The fight is violent, silent, and desperate. Ink, a thick, viscous cloud of mucus and melanin, explodes into the water, creating a phantom shape to confuse the whale's sonar. But as impressive as Architeuthis is, it has a rival. If we were diving in the Southern Ocean, near Antarctica, we might run into the giant squid's heavier, nastier cousin, the colossal squid, Mesonicoteuthis hamiltoni. While the giant squid is long and lanky, the colossal squid is built like a linebacker. It's shorter but much heavier, with a massive gelatinous body. And it decided that serrated suction cups weren't enough. The colossal squid has swiveling, 3-pointed hooks on its tentacles. These hooks can rotate 360 degrees. When it latches onto a whale, it doesn't just hold on, it shreds. Scientists have found beaks in whale stomachs that belong to colossal squids of terrifying proportions. We have never seen a fully grown one alive. We have only seen the juveniles and the dying. The true monsters, the ones that leave the frisbee-sized scars, are still down here, somewhere, lurking in the parts of the map that are labeled, "Here be dragons." As the whale drags the thrashing squid into the darkness to finish the meal, we are left drifting in the ink cloud. The violence fades back into silence. The drama of the deep is short, brutal, and unseen. But not everything down here is a monster. Some things are just misunderstood. As the adrenaline of the whale attack fades, a soft red glow appears in the distance. It's moving gently, like a floating cape. It has a name that sounds terrifying, the vampire from hell. But as is often the case in the deep, names can be deceiving. Drifting out of the shadows is a creature that sounds like it should be the villain of this entire story. Its scientific name is Vampiroteuthis infernalis, which literally translates to the vampire squid from hell. With a name like that, you expect fangs, blood-sucking, and aggression. But look at it. It's sort of cute. It's a deep, rusty red color, roughly the size of a football, with large, soulful blue eyes, the largest eyes relative to body size of any animal on Earth, even beating the giant squid in ratio. Despite the name, this little guy is not a vampire. It doesn't suck blood. It doesn't hunt. In fact, it is the only cephalopod, the family of squids and octopuses, that doesn't catch live prey at all. It is a gentle, passive garbage collector. See those two long, thin filaments trailing from its body? Those aren't tentacles for grabbing. They are sensory lines, like sticky fishing wire. The vampire squid floats motionless in the water, letting these filaments drift out to catch marine snow. The falling debris of poop, dead plankton, and mucus we saw earlier. When the lines get dirty enough, it reels them in and licks off the muck. That's it. That's the life of the vampire from hell. It's a floating janitor eating the ocean's dust bunnies. But if you startle it, the cuteness vanishes. Watch what happens when the sub's thrusters push a wave of pressure toward it. In a split second, the vampire squid pulls its arms up over its head and turns itself completely inside out. It forms a spiky, prickly ball that looks like a pineapple made of nightmares. The underside of its arms is lined with fleshy spines called cirri. They aren't actually sharp. They are soft and harmless. But to a predator in the dark, they look terrifying. This is the pineapple posture. It's a bluff. If that doesn't work, it has one more trick. It doesn't shoot ink. Ink is useless in the dark. Black on black is invisible. Instead, the vampire squid shoots a cloud of glowing, bioluminescent mucus. It creates a dazzling, sticky fireworks display of blue light that confuses the predator, blinding it temporarily, while the squid quietly slips away into the shadows. But the most impressive thing about the vampire squid isn't how it hides. It's where it lives. We are currently passing through a layer of the ocean known as the Oxygen Minimum Zone, OMZ. Here, the oxygen levels are so low that they would asphyxiate almost any other fish or squid. Most active predators can't enter this zone. They would pass out. It is a biological dead zone. But the vampire squid loves it here. It has evolved a metabolism that is incredibly slow, and its blood contains a specialized protein called hemocyanin, which makes its blood blue, that is hyper-efficient at binding oxygen. It can extract oxygen from water that is practically stagnant. By living where no one else can breathe, it avoids predators entirely. It has found the ultimate safe room, provided you don't mind the suffocation. As we leave the vampire squid to its lonely, low-oxygen life, check the depth gauge, 3,000 meters, 3,500 meters. We are approaching 4,000 meters. The continental slope, the steep underwater cliff we have been descending alongside, is starting to flatten out. We are reaching the bottom of the bowl. We are entering the abyssal zone. The word abyss comes from the Greek abyssos, meaning bottomless. But as our lights sweep the darkness below, you realize that is wrong. There is a bottom, and it is vast. We are about to land on the abyssal plain. This is the single largest habitat on Earth. It covers more than 50% of the planet's entire surface. Think about that. More than half of our world looks exactly like what you are about to see. It isn't the forests or the cities or the mountains that define Earth. It is this, a flat, endless grey desert of mud, stretching out in the cold dark for thousands of miles. The sub slows. The thrusters hum as we arrest our descent. Dust clouds billow up as we touch down. We have landed. We have touched down. The landing skids of our submersible sink a few inches into the soft grey bottom, kicking up a slow-motion cloud of silt that hangs in the water like smoke. Welcome to the Abyssal Plain. We are currently sitting at a depth of roughly 4,500 meters. If you were to walk out the airlock, which again I strongly advise against, you could walk for thousands of miles in any direction and see exactly what you are seeing right now. Absolutely nothing. This is the defining landscape of our planet. We humans like to think Earth is a planet of continents, green forests, rolling hills, bustling cities. But that's just the VIP lounge. This endless flat grey mud is the main floor. The abyssal plains cover more than 50% of the Earth's total surface area. If you picked a random spot on the globe and dropped a pin, chances are you wouldn't hit a mountain or a forest. You'd hit this. It is the flattest place on Earth, flatter than the flattest Kansas wheat field. The sediment here has been settling undisturbed for millions of years, filling in every crack and crevice of the crust below, creating a featureless grey desert that stretches into the eternal dark. But look closer at the mud. It's not sand. It's not dirt. It is scientifically referred to as ooze, which is a delightful term for what it actually is, a graveyard. This sediment is composed almost entirely of the microscopic shells of foraminifera and diatoms, tiny plankton that lived and died in the sunlit world miles above us. For eons, their empty husks have rained down, accumulating here at a rate of about 1 centimeter every 1,000 years. You are looking at a geological archive of death. Dig your hand into this mud, and you are holding the history of the oceans, layer by compressed layer. And standing on top of this history is one of the most bizarre residents of the deep. Turn the external lights to the left. See that thing standing there? It looks like a fish that has grown its own landing gear. That is the tripod fish, Bathypterois grallator. It doesn't swim, it stands. Its pelvic fins and its tail fin have elongated into stiff, bony rays that can be up to 1 meter long. It uses them like the legs of a camera tripod to prop itself up above the soft, suffocating ooze. Why? Because the current down here is weak, but it exists. By standing on stilts, the tripod fish positions its body right in the subtle flow of water moving across the bottom. It faces into the current, opens its mouth, and simply waits. Its pectoral fins have turned into long, sensory antennae that drift forward, feeling the water for the vibration of tiny shrimp. It is the ultimate energy saver. It doesn't hunt, it doesn't chase. It effectively turns itself into a piece of furniture and waits for the food to drift into its mouth. Scientists believe they spend their entire adult lives standing in one spot, facing the current, like a lonely sentinel guarding absolutely nothing. But if the tripod fish is strange, the next creature is frankly disturbing. In 1873, the crew of the Challenger pulled up a creature from these depths that baffled them. It looked like a lump of wet dough. It had no visible eyes, no visible nose, and no visible mouth on its front. It was just a smooth, round head that tapered into a tail. They described it, bottled it, and then it wasn't seen again for nearly 150 years. In 2017, during a survey off the coast of Australia, scientists found it again. It's called the faceless fish, Typhlonus nasus. It's a cusk eel that has decided facial features are just a hassle. Evolution has completely erased its face. It has eyes, but they are vestigial, buried deep beneath layers of skin and muscle, invisible from the outside and completely useless. Its mouth isn't on the front of its face. It has migrated underneath its chin, facing the mud. It cruises slowly over the sediment, sniffing the ground like a bloodhound, sucking up worms and crustaceans buried in the ooze. It is a creature that has given up on the world above and focused entirely on the mud below. It is a powerful reminder that evolution doesn't aim for beauty or complexity. It aims for survival. If you live in the dark and eat mud, you don't need a face. You just need a shovel. There is an ongoing debate among marine biologists about just how empty these plains really are. For a long time, the abyssal desert hypothesis suggested this was a dead zone with very low biodiversity. But recent studies using DNA sequencing of the mud suggest the opposite, that the sediment is teeming with thousands of unknown species of bacteria, worms, and myofauna, tiny animals living between sand grains. Historians of science still argue whether early oceanographers missed this diversity simply because they were looking for monsters instead of microbes. We wanted giant squids, we got invisible worms, but we aren't staying here. The abyssal plain is just the lobby. We have to cross this vast, flat expanse to reach the edge of the trench, the place where the floor drops out completely. As we lift off the bottom, kicking up another cloud of history, we start to drift across this grey wasteland. You might think it looks barren, but remember, every inch of this mud is food. And where there is mud, there are pigs. As we glide silently across the endless grey mud of the abyssal plain, pay close attention to the weather outside. It's still snowing. It has been snowing here for millions of years. This is the final destination of that marine snow we encountered way back in the twilight zone. It's a constant, gentle drift of organic confetti. Fecal pellets from zooplankton, soot from volcanic eruptions, dust blown off the Sahara Desert, and the disintegrating remains of dead algae. It settles on the bottom like a fine, fluffy blanket. To you and me, it looks like sludge. But to the residents of the abyss, this is manna from heaven. This layer of detritus is the only reason life can exist down here at all. It is the caloric currency of the deep. But there is a planetary side effect to this endless snowfall that is vital for our survival on the surface. This mud is a carbon vault. When phytoplankton absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then die and sink, they transport that carbon down here, locking it away in the sediment for geological timescales. This cold, dark mud is one of the largest carbon sinks on Earth. Without this constant burial of carbon, our planet would be a much hotter, more hostile place. So, who runs this global recycling plant? Who are the workers shifting all this carbon? Look out the window. They are everywhere. If an alien civilization were to land their spaceship right here on the abyssal plain and take a census of Earth's animal life, they wouldn't conclude that humans or ants were the dominant species. They would conclude that Earth is the planet of the sea cucumber. Down here, sea cucumbers, or holothurians, are the undisputed kings of the biomass. In some areas of the deep ocean floor, they make up 90% of all visible animals. They are the wildebeest of the abyss, roaming in vast, slow-motion herds across the sediment. But they don't look like the leathery, sausage-shaped cucumbers you might see in a shallow tide pool. Evolution down here has turned them into something much stranger. Drifting into our lights is a creature that looks disturbingly like a pink, water-filled piglet. Meet the sea pig, scotoplanes. It is, without a doubt, the cutest thing you will find at 5,000 meters. It's a few inches long, translucent pink, and plump. But instead of slithering like a slug, it walks. It has evolved 5 to 7 pairs of legs, which are actually modified tube feet, that are inflated with water. It uses hydraulic pressure to trot across the mud. It also has 2 pairs of antennae on its head, also modified feet, and a ring of feeding tentacles around its mouth. The sea pig is a vacuum cleaner. It walks along the bottom, using its mouth tentacles to sift through the mud, picking out the freshest, tastiest bits of marine snow and shoving them into its mouth. It processes the sediment, extracts the organic nutrients, and poops out clean sand. It is basically an earthworm designed by a cartoonist. One of the most fascinating things about sea pigs is their social behavior. You rarely find just one. They are often found in massive droves, hundreds of them facing the exact same direction. Why the formation marching? They are rheotactic, which means they orient themselves to the current. By facing into the flow of water, they can smell fresh deposits of food drifting toward them. If a particularly rich patch of snow lands, say the debris from a dead whale, sea pigs will swarm it. You can find hundreds of them piled on top of each other in a pink, writhing heap, frantically vacuuming up the windfall. They are also surprisingly fragile. If we were to try to bring a sea pig to the surface, it would disintegrate. Its body is basically just water held together by a thin membrane of collagen. It relies on the immense pressure of the deep ocean to hold its shape. In a way, the pressure is its skeleton. Take the pressure away, and the pig becomes a puddle. But don't let their goofy appearance fool you. These herds of walking sausages are performing a critical service. By churning up the sediment, they oxygenate the mud, allowing bacteria and other microscopic life to thrive. They are the gardeners of the abyss, tilling the soil of the largest ecosystem on the planet. They also host their own guests. If you look closely at the skin of a sea pig, you might see tiny snails or parasitic crustaceans hitching a ride. In the vast emptiness of the plain, a sea pig is like a moving bus, offering a hard surface and a free ride to smaller creatures. As we leave the herd behind, marching slowly into the dark, the terrain begins to change. The flat monotony of the plain is broken by something large looming in the distance. It's not a rock. It's organic. We are about to encounter a whale fall. And if the marine snow was a light snack, this is the banquet of the century. But be warned, what happens to a whale after it dies is not for the squeamish. It is a biological event so massive, it creates its own ecosystem for decades. Up ahead, your lights catch something white and jagged rising out of the grey mud. It looks like the ruins of a Gothic cathedral, a massive archway of bleached bone standing stark against the darkness. But as we drift closer, you realize this isn't a building. It's a rib cage. We have stumbled upon a whale fall. When a great whale dies at the surface, maybe from old age, maybe from a ship strike, it sometimes floats, but often, if it has exhaled or lost enough buoyancy, it sinks. It plummets through kilometers of water, crashing onto the abyssal plain with a dull, muffled thud. Down here, in a world defined by starvation, the arrival of a 40-ton carcass is the equivalent of winning the lottery, Christmas morning, and an all-you-can-eat buffet happening simultaneously. A single whale carcass delivers as much organic carbon to the seafloor as 2,000 years of that steady marine snow we just watched. It is a biological bomb of energy. But this isn't a peaceful graveyard. It is a crime scene, and the first responders are already here. Writhing in and out of the eye sockets and the gaps between the ribs are snake-like creatures, grey-pink and hideous. These are hagfish, affectionately known as slime eels. They are living fossils, virtually unchanged for 300 million years. They have no jaws, no true eyes, and no spine. Instead, they have a mouth that looks like a vertical slit lined with rows of horny rasps. They don't bite, they grate. They burrow head first into the whale's soft tissues, eating their way from the inside out. If you think that's gross, wait until you hear about their defense mechanism. If a shark tries to take a bite out of a hagfish, the hagfish's skin instantly releases a cloud of slime. But this isn't normal mucus. It contains microscopic protein threads that unravel in seawater. A teaspoon of hagfish slime can expand to turn a 5-gallon bucket of water into a solid, suffocating gel in seconds. It clogs the gills of the attacking shark, choking it until it spits the hagfish out. It is the ultimate "I'm rubber, you're glue" defense, only the glue is a suffocating biopolymer. And since they have no jaws to bite off a chunk of meat, hagfish have a unique dining etiquette. They tie their own bodies into a knot. They slide the knot down toward their head, using the leverage to brace against the carcass and tear a mouthful of flesh free. It's a gruesome, writhing ballet of leverage and slime. Circling the hagfish are the heavyweights, Pacific sleeper sharks. These massive, sluggish predators can grow to 7 meters long. They move in slow motion to conserve energy, cruising in from miles away, guided by the scent of rotting blubber. They gorge themselves alongside the hagfish, stripping the bulk of the soft tissue in a frenzy that can last for months. This is stage 1 of the decomposition, the mobile scavenger phase. But what happens when the meat is gone? When the sleeper sharks and hagfish drift away, leaving only a bare white skeleton? The party isn't over, it's just getting started. We enter stage 2, the enrichment opportunist phase. The sediment around the bones is now soaked in organic runoff. It becomes a carpet of life. Strange crabs and millions of amphipods, tiny shrimp-like creatures, swarm the bones, picking at the leftovers. But look closely at the bone itself. See that reddish fuzzy carpet covering the ribs? It looks like moss growing on a stone. Zoom in. Those aren't plants. They are worms. Specifically, Osedax worms. The Latin name literally translates to bone-eating. The colloquial name is even better: zombie worms. These were only discovered in 2002, which is shockingly recent. For decades, scientists wondered how whale bones disappeared. Now we know. The zombie worm has no mouth and no stomach. Instead, it grows green, root-like structures that burrow deep into the hard bone. Inside these roots, the worm hosts a colony of symbiotic bacteria. The worm secretes acid to dissolve the calcium of the bone, and the bacteria digest the fats and oils trapped inside the marrow, feeding the worm. They are essentially drilling for oil in the skeleton of a Leviathan. But here is the weirdest part. And I know we've covered some weird reproductive strategies tonight, but this one might take the gold medal. When scientists first studied Osedax worms, they noticed they were all female. They couldn't find the males anywhere. Then they looked closer, inside the tubes of the females. It turns out the male Osedax is microscopic. He never grows past the larval stage. He lives his entire life inside the body of the female, existing solely to fertilize her eggs. And a single female can host a harem of hundreds of these microscopic males inside her body at once. It's efficient, sure, but it definitely makes for awkward family reunions. This sulfur-philic stage can last for decades. A single large whale skeleton can support a thriving ecosystem of worms, crabs, and bacteria for up to 50 years. It becomes an island of life in the empty plain. There is a scholarly debate raging right now about whether these whale falls act as stepping stones. The theory suggests that species from the deep hydrothermal vents, which might be thousands of miles apart, use whale carcasses as rest stops to migrate across the ocean floor, hopping from one skeleton to the next, over generations. But as we leave the bony ruins of this giant behind, the ground beneath us begins to change. The flat, predictable mud of the abyssal plain is ending. The seafloor is starting to buckle and warp. The sonar shows the bottom dropping away. We are reaching the edge of the tectonic plate. We are done with the shallows of the 5,000-meter plain. We are about to dive into the scar itself. We are entering the subduction zone. As we leave the macabre feast of the whale fall behind, the sonar display on your dashboard changes. The flat, monotonous line that has represented the abyssal plain for the last few hours begins to dip. The grey mud outside, which has been our floor for miles, is tilting. We are no longer just driving across the ocean bottom. We are driving off the edge of a cliff. You are now hovering directly over one of the most violent geological intersections on the planet. To the east, behind us, lies the Pacific Plate. To the west, ahead of us, lies the Philippine Sea Plate. We are sitting right at the seam where these two titanic slabs of the Earth's crust collide. This is the subduction factory. Imagine the floor of the Pacific Ocean as a giant, slow-moving conveyor belt. It is made of solid rock, born from magma erupting at ridges thousands of miles away near the Americas. For about 170 million years, since the middle of the Jurassic period, when dinosaurs were just hitting their stride, this specific patch of rock has been traveling slowly westward. As it traveled, it cooled. And as it cooled, it became denser, heavier. Now it has reached the end of the line. It slams into the Philippine Sea Plate. But because the Pacific Plate is older, colder, and heavier, it doesn't crash into the Philippine Plate like a car crash. It slides underneath it. This process is called subduction. The Pacific Plate is being forced downward, dragging the ocean floor with it, plunging deep into the Earth's burning mantle to be melted down and recycled. Look at the angle of the slope below us. It isn't a gentle hill. It is the Earth's crust literally buckling under the strain. The trench isn't just a hole in the ground. It is the visible crease formed by this planetary wrestling match. Shutterstock. The scale of this system is hard to wrap your head around. The Mariana Trench isn't a solitary pit. It is a scar in the crust that runs for more than 2,500 kilometers. That is longer than the Grand Canyon, longer than the Alps. If you could drain the water, this would look like a reversed mountain range, a valley of death curving across the face of the Earth. And it is moving. Right now, as we float here, the Pacific Plate is sliding under the Philippine Plate at a speed of roughly 7 centimeters per year. That sounds slow. It's about the speed your fingernails grow. But in geological terms, that is a sprint. When rock grinds against rock at that speed, with the weight of an entire ocean on top of it, it doesn't slide smoothly. It sticks. It builds up tension. Pressure accumulates for years, decades, centuries. And then, in a split second, it snaps. That snap is a megathrust earthquake. This zone is part of the Ring of Fire for a reason. Almost 90% of the world's earthquakes occur along these subduction boundaries. The massive 2011 Tohoku earthquake in Japan, That was caused by exactly this mechanism. The Pacific Plate shoving itself under Japan until the crust couldn't take it anymore. Geologists and seismologists still fiercely debate the mechanics of what happens to the slab once it goes down. Some argue that the descending plate stays rigid, diving all the way to the core mantle boundary like a dropped dinner plate. Others believe it melts and breaks apart, much shallower in the mantle. It is a scholarly argument about the fate of the ground beneath our feet. But for us, hovering here, the reality is simpler. The floor is disappearing. The rock you are looking at is 170 million years old. It has carried the weight of oceans, hosted trillions of generations of sea cucumbers, and supported the carcasses of whales. And now, it is about to die. It is sliding into the furnace of the Earth's interior to be melted back into magma. Millions of years from now, this same rock might erupt from a volcano in Japan or the Philippines, reborn as new land. The Earth is the ultimate recycler. Nothing is wasted, not even the ground itself. But this massive geological machine doesn't just destroy, it leaks. As the plate gets crushed and twisted on its way down, fluids and gases trapped in the rock are squeezed out like water from a sponge. These fluids have to go somewhere. Up ahead, looming out of the darkness, is a shape that shouldn't be here. It looks like a mountain, but it's not made of hard basalt. It's soft. It's oozing. We are approaching the mud volcanoes. As we hover near the edge of the subduction zone, you might expect to see fire. After all, the Mariana Trench is a key component of the Ring of Fire, that volatile horseshoe of seismic activity that encircles the Pacific. Above the water, this geological violence manifests as explosive stratovolcanoes, Mount Fuji, Mount St. Helens, Pinatubo. But down here, in the crushing dark of the forearc, the Earth doesn't spew lava, it spews mud. Looming out of the darkness ahead is a ghostly, pale mountain. It rises hundreds of meters from the seafloor, a colossal pimple on the face of the deep. This is a mud volcano. Specifically, we are likely looking at the Big Blue Seamount, a massive, active serpentine mud volcano that sits on the overriding plate just west of the trench axis. It isn't built of basalt or granite. It is built of a finely ground, blue-green slurry of rock and water. It looks like a giant anthill made of wet cement. Here is what is happening. As the Pacific Plate grinds its way underneath the Philippine Plate, it carries a lot of water with it, water trapped in the sediments and the crystal structure of the rocks. As that plate descends into the hot, high-pressure interior of the Earth, that water is squeezed out like juice from a lemon. This super-pressurized fluid rises back up through cracks in the overriding plate. But on its way up, it reacts with the mantle rock, peridotite, changing it chemically into a new, waxy green rock called serpentinite. This process increases the volume of the rock, causing it to expand and rise, eventually erupting onto the seafloor as a thick, cold paste. This isn't a hot eruption like you see in Hawaii. These are cold seeps. The fluid oozing out might only be a few degrees warmer than the surrounding seawater, but while it lacks heat, it is rich in something far more valuable to the locals: chemical potential. The fluids leaking from this mud volcano are loaded with methane, hydrogen gas, and hydrogen sulfide. To us, these are toxic fumes. To the life forms clinging to the sides of this mud mountain, this is an all-you-can-eat buffet. Look closely at the slopes of the volcano. They are covered in dense, clustering mats of life. There are beds of mussels, Bathymodiolus, blanketing the mud like cobblestones. These aren't filtering plankton from the water like their cousins on a beach pier. There is barely any plankton down here. Instead, these mussels have turned their gills into biological reactors. Inside their gill tissues live billions of symbiotic bacteria. The mussel breathes in the methane and hydrogen sulfide bubbling up from the mud. The bacteria consume these chemicals and convert them into sugars, and then the mussel eats the sugars produced by the bacteria. It is a perfect closed-loop system. They don't need the sun. They don't need the marine snow drifting down from above. They are powered directly by the chemical energy of the Earth's crust. This process is called chemosynthesis. Whatever happens on the surface, nuclear winter, asteroid impact, the sun burning out, these communities wouldn't care. They would barely notice. They are decoupled from the solar ecosystem. Waving gently in the current among the mussels are tubes that look like white plastic straws topped with bright red feathers. These are vestimentiferan tube worms, specifically Lamellibrachia. Like the mussels, they have no mouth and no stomach. They are simply a housing unit for bacteria. Those red feathers are filled with hemoglobin, the same molecule that makes your blood red, which captures the oxygen from the seawater and the sulfides from the vent fluid to feed their internal bacterial colonies. They are some of the slowest growing and longest lived animals on the planet. Some individuals here may be over 200 years old, silently waving in the dark since the time of Napoleon, fed by the breath of the earth. There is a profound scientific debate centered right here on these mud volcanoes. Many astrobiologists believe that this, not the warm, sunlit tide pools, is where life on Earth actually began. The serpentinization process produces hydrogen, which is the primal fuel for simple life. If life exists on Europa, the moon of Jupiter, or Enceladus, the moon of Saturn, it almost certainly looks like this. Those moons have ice crusts covering deep, dark oceans. They don't have sunlight, but they likely have tectonic activity. They likely have serpentinization. So as you stare at this blue mud volcano covered in blind worms and gas-eating mussels, you aren't just looking at the bottom of the Pacific. You are looking at the best blueprint we have for aliens. But as we drift away from this oasis of chemical life, the landscape shifts back to the barren reality of the descent. The mud volcano fades into the gloom above us. The slope steepens. The biology thins out. And then, in the cone of light from our sub, you see something flashing. Not bioluminescence, not the shimmer of a fish scale. It is a bright, artificial, crinkling reflection. It is a color that doesn't exist in nature, a garish, synthetic white. Drifting past the alien architecture of the mud volcano, your eyes catch a glimpse of something starkly familiar. It stands out against the eternal gray of the sediment, not because of its size, but because of its pristine artificial brightness. It's a white plastic bag. It is snagged on a jagged rock, fluttering gently in the deep-sea current like a surrender flag planted by humanity. Seeing it here, miles below the surface, hits you with a strange, sinking feeling. You expect to see monsters. You expect to see darkness. You don't expect to see a grocery bag from a convenience store. But this is the reality of the deep ocean today. When explorer Victor Vescovo piloted his submersible limiting factor to the bottom of the Mariana Trench in 2019, breaking the record for the deepest dive in history, he didn't just find new species of amphipods. He found a plastic bag and candy wrappers. Think about the absurdity of that. We have sent fewer humans to this depth than to the moon, yet our trash beat us here by decades. And here is the grim scientific truth. That bag is immortal. On the surface, plastic is a nightmare, but it eventually breaks down. Sort of. Sunlight, UV radiation, makes plastic brittle, causing it to crack and fragment into smaller pieces through a process called photodegradation. Heat helps this process along. But down here, we are in a refrigerator. The water is near freezing. There is absolutely no sunlight. The oxygen levels in the sediment are low. The deep ocean is the perfect preservation chamber. That shopping bag isn't going anywhere. It will likely remain intact for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, long after the store it came from has gone bankrupt and the civilization that made it has crumbled. It is a forever artifact, a pristine fossil of the Anthropocene era waiting for future geologists to discover. But the visible trash is just the tip of the iceberg. The real problem is invisible. Zoom in on the tiny amphipods scuttling across the sediment near that bag. They look normal, right? But if we were to catch one and put it under a microscope, we would likely find synthetic fibers in its gut. In a study conducted on amphipods captured from the deepest trenches in the Pacific, including the Mariana, scientists found that roughly 72% of the individuals contained microplastics. In the Challenger Deep, that number hit 100% in some samples. Every single creature tested had plastic in its stomach. How? Gravity. When you wash your synthetic fleece jacket or scrub your face with those exfoliating microbeads, those tiny particles wash down the drain, into the river, and out to sea. They eventually sink. The trenches act as giant geological funnels. The shape of the V-cleft concentrates everything that falls: food, carcasses, and plastic, right at the bottom. The deepest place on Earth is also the planet's ultimate trash can. These animals are scavengers. They have evolved over millions of years to eat anything that falls from above. They can't distinguish between a flake of dead algae and a fragment of rayon. So, they eat it. The plastic blocks their digestive tracts, or leaches toxic chemicals like PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, into their tissues. Scientists recently discovered a new species of amphipod in the Mariana Trench and named it Eurythenes plasticus. They didn't name it for its appearance. They named it to make a point. Even a creature we had never seen before, living in the most remote place on the planet, was already contaminated by us. There is a grim irony here. We often talk about the deep ocean as a pristine wilderness, an untouched frontier. But chemically, it is arguably one of the most polluted places on Earth, because the pollutants have nowhere else to go. They sink, they settle, and they stay. Historians and geologists still argue about where to place the golden spike, the marker in the rock record that defines the start of the Anthropocene, the age of humans. Some say it's the radioactive fallout from nuclear tests. Others say it's the soot from the Industrial Revolution. But a growing camp argues it will be a distinct layer of plastic embedded in the sediment of the ocean floor. Imagine a geologist 10 million years from now digging up this strata. They will find a layer of compressed mud containing the fossilized remains of deep-sea creatures, and right next to them, a layer of compressed polymers. They will see a sudden, sharp, distinct line where the plastic appears, marking the moment we arrived. But we can't dwell on the tragedy too long, because the floor is dropping out from under us again. The plastic bag fades into the darkness behind us. The slope we have been following, the overriding plate, is ending. We are crossing the axis. Check your depth gauge. We are passing 6,000 meters. You might feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the dive. We are leaving the Abyssal zone. We are entering the Hadal zone. The term comes from the Greek Hades, the underworld. This is the realm of the trenches. Only the deepest 45 trenches on Earth penetrate this zone. It is an exclusive club of deep holes, separated from each other by thousands of miles of shallower abyssal plains. And because they are so isolated, each trench is like an inverted island. Evolution has been running independent experiments in each of them. We are about to descend into the deepest of them all. The walls are narrowing. The pressure is ramping up to levels that defy logic. And the creatures? They are about to get very, very strange. Watch the digital readout on your console. It just flickered past 6,000 meters. If this were a video game, this is the part where the music would change to something low, ominous, and heavy on the bass. We have officially crossed the final frontier of ocean zonation. We have left the abyssal zone behind and entered the Hadal zone. The name comes from the French Hadal, derived from the Greek Hades, the god of the underworld and the abode of the dead. It is a fitting name. This zone is comprised exclusively of the deep ocean trenches, the long, narrow scars cut into the crust where tectonic plates collide. There are 33 major trenches and 13 troughs that make up this zone, but combined, they account for less than 0.2% of the seafloor's total area. They are the ultra-deep, ultra-exclusive VIP rooms of the ocean. And like any exclusive club, once you are in, it is very hard to leave. To understand the biology down here, you have to invert your understanding of geography. On land, islands are isolated patches of ground surrounded by water. Animals evolve on islands in unique ways. Think of the tortoises on Galapagos or the dodos on Mauritius, because they can't cross the ocean to breed with anyone else. Down here, the trenches act exactly like inverted islands. Imagine you are a fish adapted to life at 8,000 meters. The crushing pressure is your normal. The freezing cold is your comfort zone. If you tried to swim up and out of the trench to cross the abyssal plain to get to another trench, the drop in pressure would kill you. You are trapped. The shallow water of the abyssal plain, which is still 5,000 meters deep, acts like a barrier, an impassable wall of low-pressure air that you cannot cross. Shutterstock. This means that each trench is an isolated evolutionary laboratory. The creatures living in the Mariana Trench have been cut off from the creatures in the Puerto Rico Trench or the Kermadec Trench for millions of years. Evolution has been running independent experiments in each of these deep holes. In fact, studies show that up to 70% of the species found in a specific trench are endemic, meaning they are found there and nowhere else on Earth. As we descend further into this V-shaped canyon, you need to understand the funnel effect. Topography is destiny. The trench walls slope steeply downward, creating a massive geological funnel. Anything that falls from the surface, dead whales, driftwood, algae, and yes, our plastic trash, eventually tumbles down these slopes. Gravity and seismic landslides concentrate everything right at the bottom axis of the trench. This is the paradox of the Hadal zone. You would expect it to be the most barren place on the planet because it is the furthest from the sun. But because of this funneling effect, the bottom of a trench can actually be richer in food than the abyssal plain above it. It's a nutrient trap. If you can survive the pressure, the dining is surprisingly good. But surviving the pressure is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. We are now deeper than the wreck of the Titanic. She rests at about 3,800 meters, which feels like shallow water compared to where we are now. We are deeper than the average depth of the ocean. We are deeper than the height of Mount Kilimanjaro. The sphere is groaning again. The walls are contracting. The air inside feels denser, heavier. It's largely psychological, but the knowledge that there are 6 kilometers of water above your head carries a weight that is hard to shake. Outside, the water is crystal clear. Without the sediment of the plains or the plankton of the surface, the visibility is nearly infinite, or it would be if there were any light to see by. Our spotlights carve out a lonely tunnel in the void. It feels empty, desolate. But looking out at the blackness, you have to remember that this isn't just a hole. It is a sanctuary. For billions of years, while the surface of the Earth was being pummeled by asteroids, scorched by solar flares, and frozen by ice ages, this place remained exactly the same. The temperature hasn't changed. The dark hasn't changed. It is the most stable environment on the planet. If you wanted to store a biological backup drive for Earth, you would put it here. But biology here runs on a different operating system. As we approach 7,000 meters, the very molecules that make up life start to fail. Proteins, the building blocks of muscle and enzymes, rely on their 3D shape to function. Under this kind of pressure, normal proteins get crushed. They fold wrong. They stop working. So, how does anything live down here without its body shutting down at a molecular level? The answer lies in a chemical that smells distinctively like rotting fish. We are about to enter the realm of the biochemically modified. We are passing 7,000 meters. The pressure outside is now roughly 700 atmospheres. To put that in perspective, imagine a human standing on one leg. Now imagine he is holding up a Boeing 747. That is the force pushing against every square inch of the hull right now. But while our titanium sphere handles the mechanical stress with brute strength, biological life has to handle it with chemistry. And this is where things get really interesting. You see, pressure doesn't just crush air pockets. At these extreme depths, it starts to interfere with the fundamental machinery of life. It attacks proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acids that fold up into very specific 3D shapes. Their shape is what allows them to do their jobs, digesting food, contracting muscles, sending nerve signals. If a protein loses its shape, if it unfolds or gets crushed, it stops working. It's like trying to use a bent key in a lock. It just won't turn. Under the pressure of the Hadal zone, water molecules are forced into the tiny spaces inside these protein structures, distorting them. For a normal fish, say a goldfish or a trout, diving this deep would be fatal not because its bones would break, but because its metabolism would simply stop. Its enzymes would freeze up. It would die of cellular failure. So how do the locals survive? They have a secret weapon, a chemical brace. It is a molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO. Think of a protein like a fragile tent. The water pressure is a gale force wind trying to flatten it. TMAO acts like the rigid poles you stick inside the tent to hold it up. It binds to water molecules in a way that creates a protective, structural scaffold around the proteins, forcing them to keep their shape even under immense crushing weight. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it needs in its cells. It is a direct, linear correlation. A fish at 1,000 meters has a little bit. A fish at 7,000 meters is absolutely packed with it. And here is the funny part. You already know what TMAO smells like. When a fish dies and is exposed to air, the TMAO in its body breaks down into a simpler molecule called trimethylamine, TMA. That molecule is responsible for the distinctive, pungent, fishy smell of rotting seafood. So, ironically, the freshest fish in the ocean, the ones living alive and well in the deepest trenches, would actually smell the fishiest if you brought them to the surface. They are marinated in the stuff. They are essentially swimming pickles, preserved against the pressure by their own internal chemistry. But there is a limit. And this brings us to one of the most fascinating theories in deep-sea biology: the biochemical ceiling. Biologists have calculated that there is a hard limit to how much TMAO a fish can cram into its cells. As the concentration of TMAO increases, the internal salinity of the fish's cells increases. If a fish were to swim deeper than about 8,200 meters, roughly 27,000 feet, it would need so much TMAO to counteract the pressure that its cells would become saltier than the seawater outside. This would trigger a catastrophic reaction called osmosis. Water would rush into the fish's cells to balance the salinity. The cells would swell and burst. The fish would essentially explode on a cellular level. Therefore, scientists believe there is a no-fish line at roughly 8,200 meters. Below that depth, fish simply cannot exist. Their biochemistry hits a wall. The trench continues down to 11,000 meters, but the fish have to stop here. They are chemically barred from the basement. Of course, this is just a theory. And nature loves to prove us wrong. But so far, every robotic lander and submersible dive has confirmed it. We see fish all the way down, and then right around the 8,000-meter mark, they vanish. But pressure isn't the only problem. There is also the cold. At 4 degrees Celsius, fats tend to solidify. Think of a stick of butter in the fridge. It's hard. Now think of olive oil. It stays liquid. Cell membranes are made of fats, lipids. To function, they need to be fluid, like the olive oil. If they turn into butter, the cell dies because it can't let nutrients in or waste out. So the creatures down here have evolved cell membranes packed with unsaturated fats, the liquid kind. They have chemically tuned their own bodies to remain fluid in the freezing dark. It is a delicate, microscopic balancing act. They are constantly adjusting their lipid profiles to ensure they don't turn into a solid block of margarine. As we approach this theoretical 8,000-meter barrier, we are entering the territory of the ultimate survivor, the creature that lives right at the edge of the impossible. It doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a ghost. Drifting just above the sediment at 8,000 meters, our lights catch a movement. It's subtle, a ripple of pale pink against the grey mud. It looks delicate, almost ethereal, like a wet tissue floating in the current. This is the deepest fish ever discovered, the Mariana snailfish, Pseudolaparis suaire. Forget everything you think a deep-sea monster should look like. This isn't the jagged, toothy fangtooth or the armored viperfish we saw earlier. The snailfish is soft, smooth, and honestly kind of adorable. It looks like a tadpole that grew up but never really got its act together. It has no scales. Its skin is a translucent, gelatinous layer that reveals the pink muscles and the massive liver underneath. Why does the deepest fish in the ocean look so soft? Because armor is useless down here. A hard shell or heavy scales would be crushed by the pressure unless they were incredibly thick, which would make the fish too heavy to swim. So, the snailfish took the opposite approach. It became permeable. Its body is mostly water and gelatinous tissue, allowing the pressure to pass right through it without resistance. It doesn't fight the ocean, it becomes the ocean. Even its skeleton has adapted. If you were to X-ray a snailfish, you wouldn't see much. Its bones are largely cartilaginous, flexible and light, and its skull is incomplete. That's right, it has an open skull. If it had a fully closed, bony cranium, the pressure differential could crush its brain. By leaving the skull open and unfused, the pressure is equalized perfectly inside and out. Despite its fragile appearance, this little pink blob is the apex predator of its world. Down here, in the Hadal zone, there are no sharks. There are no giant squids. The snailfish is the king. It glides over the sediment using its pectoral fins, hunting the only food source abundant enough to support it. Amphipods. Those tiny shrimp-like crustaceans we talked about earlier. The snailfish sucks them up like a vacuum cleaner. Since there are no other fish to compete with, it has the entire buffet to itself. Scientists were shocked when they first found them. They expected the deepest fish to be a lethargic, low-energy scavenger. Instead, snailfish are surprisingly active. They swarm around landers, bumping into cameras and gulping down bait with enthusiastic energy. They are thriving. But remember the biochemical ceiling we discussed? The snailfish is living right up against it. Its tissues are saturated with TMAO, that protein-stabilizing molecule. It has the highest concentration of TMAO ever recorded in a fish. It is chemically maxed out. If it swam just a few hundred meters deeper, the osmotic balance would flip and its cells would burst. It is living on the razor's edge of what is biologically possible for a vertebrate. It's a humbling thought. This tiny, pink, squishy creature has conquered an environment that would instantly kill a great white shark, a blue whale, or a human. It owns the deep. We are passing 7,000 meters. The pressure outside is now roughly 700 atmospheres. To put that in perspective, imagine a human standing on one leg. Now, imagine he is holding up a Boeing 747. That is the force pushing against every square inch of the hull right now. But while our titanium sphere handles the mechanical stress with brute strength, biological life has to handle it with chemistry. And this is where things get really interesting. You see, pressure doesn't just crush air pockets. At these extreme depths, it starts to interfere with the fundamental machinery of life. It attacks proteins. Proteins are long chains of amino acids that fold up into very specific 3D shapes. Their shape is what allows them to do their jobs, digesting food, contracting muscles, sending nerve signals. If a protein loses its shape, if it unfolds or gets crushed, it stops working. It's like trying to use a bent key in a lock. It just won't turn. Under the pressure of the Hadal zone, water molecules are forced into the tiny spaces inside these protein structures, distorting them. For a normal fish, say a goldfish or a trout, diving this deep would be fatal not because its bones would break, but because its metabolism would simply stop. Its enzymes would freeze up. It would die of cellular failure. So, how do the locals survive? They have a secret weapon, a chemical brace. It is a molecule called trimethylamine N-oxide, or TMAO. Think of a protein like a fragile tent. The water pressure is a gale force wind trying to flatten it. TMAO acts like the rigid poles you stick inside the tent to hold it up. It binds to water molecules in a way that creates a protective, structural scaffold around the proteins, forcing them to keep their shape even under immense crushing weight. The deeper a fish lives, the more TMAO it needs in its cells. It is a direct, linear correlation. A fish at 1,000 meters has a little bit. A fish at 7,000 meters is absolutely packed with it. And here is the funny part. You already know what TMAO smells like. When a fish dies and is exposed to air, the TMAO in its body breaks down into a simpler molecule called trimethylamine, TMA. That molecule is responsible for the distinctive, pungent, fishy smell of rotting seafood. So, ironically, the freshest fish in the ocean, the ones living alive and well in the deepest trenches, would actually smell the fishiest if you brought them to the surface. They are marinated in the stuff. They are essentially swimming pickles, preserved against the pressure by their own internal chemistry. But there is a limit, and this brings us to one of the most fascinating theories in deep-sea biology, the biochemical ceiling. Biologists have calculated that there is a hard limit to how much TMAO fish can cram into its cells. As the concentration of TMAO increases, the internal salinity of the fish's cells increases. If a fish were to swim deeper than about 8,200 meters, roughly 27,000 feet, it would need so much TMAO to counteract the pressure that its cells would become saltier than the seawater outside. This would trigger a catastrophic reaction called osmosis. Water would rush into the fish's cells to balance the salinity. The cells would swell and burst. The fish would essentially explode on a cellular level. Therefore, scientists believe there is a no-fish line at roughly 8,200 meters. Below that depth, fish simply cannot exist. Their biochemistry hits a wall. The trench continues down to 11,000 meters, but the fish have to stop here. They are chemically barred from the basement. Of course, this is just a theory. And nature loves to prove us wrong. But so far, every robotic lander and submersible dive has confirmed it. We see fish all the way down, and then, right around the 8,000-meter mark, they vanish. But pressure isn't the only problem. There is also the cold. At 4 degrees Celsius, fats tend to solidify. Think of a stick of butter in the fridge. It's hard. Now think of olive oil. It stays liquid. Cell membranes are made of fats, lipids. To function, they need to be fluid, like the olive oil. If they turn into butter, the cell dies because it can't let nutrients in or waste out. So the creatures down here have evolved cell membranes packed with unsaturated fats, the liquid kind. They have chemically tuned their own bodies to remain fluid in the freezing dark. It is a delicate, microscopic balancing act. They are constantly adjusting their lipid profiles to ensure they don't turn into a solid block of margarine. As we approach this theoretical 8,000-meter barrier, we are entering the territory of the ultimate survivor, the creature that lives right at the edge of the impossible. It doesn't look like a monster. It looks like a ghost. Drifting just above the sediment at 8,000 meters, our lights catch a movement. It's subtle, a ripple of pale pink against the gray mud. It looks delicate, almost ethereal, like a wet tissue floating in the current. This is the deepest fish ever discovered, the Mariana snailfish, Pseudoliparis suirae. Forget everything you think a deep-sea monster should look like. This isn't the jagged, toothy fangtooth or the armored viperfish we saw earlier. The snailfish is soft, smooth, and honestly, kind of adorable. It looks like a tadpole that grew up but never really got its act together. It has no scales. Its skin is a translucent, gelatinous layer that reveals the pink muscles and the massive liver underneath. Why does the deepest fish in the ocean look so soft? Because armor is useless down here. A hard shell or heavy scales would be crushed by the pressure unless they were incredibly thick, which would make the fish too heavy to swim. So, the snailfish took the opposite approach. It became permeable. Its body is mostly water and gelatinous tissue, allowing the pressure to pass right through it without resistance. It doesn't fight the ocean, it becomes the ocean. Even its skeleton has adapted. If you were to X-ray a snailfish, you wouldn't see much. Its bones are largely cartilaginous, flexible and light, and its skull is incomplete. That's right, it has an open skull. If it had a fully closed, bony cranium, the pressure differential could crush its brain. By leaving the skull open and unfused, the pressure is equalized perfectly inside and out. Despite its fragile appearance, this little pink blob is the apex predator of its world. Down here, in the Hadal zone, there are no sharks. There are no giant squids. The snailfish is the king. It glides over the sediment using its pectoral fins, hunting the only food source abundant enough to support it. Amphipods. Those tiny shrimp-like crustaceans we talked about earlier. The snailfish sucks them up like a vacuum cleaner. Since there are no other fish to compete with, it has the entire buffet to itself. Scientists were shocked when they first found them. They expected the deepest fish to be a lethargic, low-energy scavenger. Instead, snailfish are surprisingly active. They swarm around landers, bumping into cameras and gulping down bait with enthusiastic energy. They are thriving. But remember the biochemical ceiling we discussed? The snailfish is living right up against it. Its tissues are saturated with TMAO, that protein-stabilizing molecule. It has the highest concentration of TMAO ever recorded in a fish. It is chemically maxed out. If it swam just a few hundred meters deeper, the osmotic balance would flip and its cells would burst. It is living on the razor's edge of what is biologically possible for a vertebrate. It's a humbling thought. This tiny, pink, squishy creature has conquered an environment that would instantly kill a great white shark, a blue whale, or a human. It owns the deep. But as we drop past 8,200 meters, the snailfish disappear. The no-fish line is real. We have crossed it. From here on out, no vertebrate can follow us. We are leaving the family of animals with backbones behind. The trench continues to plunge deeper. 9,000 meters, 10,000 meters. You might think the water would be empty now. The fish are gone. The sharks are gone. Surely nothing lives this deep. You would be wrong. The bottom of the trench isn't empty. It is swarming. But the things living down here aren't soft and pink. They are armored. They are huge. And they are hungry. As the depth gauge ticks toward 5 digits, prepare yourself. We are entering the land of the supergiants. We have crossed the invisible barrier. The depth gauge reads 9,000 meters. The snailfish, those brave gelatinous pioneers, are gone. The biochemical laws of the universe have evicted them. We are now deeper than Mount Everest is tall. For a moment, the water outside feels empty. The marine snow is still falling, a relentless grey dust, but there are no hungry mouths catching it in mid-water. The silence of the instruments is heavy. You might start to feel like the only living thing in the universe. And then, something hits the window. Thud! It wasn't a rock. It moved. You turn the external spot, sweeping the beam across the sediment. And there, scurrying out of the darkness, is something that triggers a very primal, very human revulsion. It looks like a shrimp, but it's wrong. It's curled, segmented, and pale. It's an amphipod. Now, you've seen amphipods before. If you've ever been to a beach and kicked over a pile of dried seaweed, you've seen sandhoppers or sand fleas jumping around. They are tiny, usually a few millimeters long, barely the size of a grain of rice. They are the insects of the sea, the bottom rung snacks for everything else. But down here, in the Hadal zone, the snack has become the monster. Crawling over the mud is Alitella gigantea, the supergiant amphipod. It isn't the size of a rice grain, it is the size of a rabbit. Some specimens have been recorded at over 34 centimeters, 13 inches long. Imagine a sand flea that is larger than your shoe. Imagine a cockroach the size of a cat. That is the scale of the creature scratching at the glass. This is the most extreme example of deep-sea gigantism we have encountered yet. While the snailfish turned to jelly to survive, these amphipods doubled down on armor. They are the tanks of the trench. But building a tank down here is incredibly difficult. In the shallow ocean, crustaceans build their shells out of calcium carbonate, the same stuff as chalk and seashells. But at these extreme pressures, the chemistry of the ocean changes. The water becomes more acidic and corrosive to calcium. Below a certain depth, called the carbonate compensation depth, calcium carbonate simply dissolves. A normal crab down here would find its shell melting off its body like an aspirin in a glass of water. So how are these giants not dissolving? Meet their smaller but chemically genius cousin, Hirondelia gigas. Scientists were baffled by how Hirondelia could maintain a hard shell at 10,000 meters. When they analyzed the exoskeletons of these creatures, they found something that shouldn't be there: aluminum. Specifically, these amphipods have evolved the ability to extract rare traces of aluminum from the sediment in the trench floor. They process it inside their bodies and secrete a layer of aluminum hydroxide gel, a synthetic metallic shield, over their shells. This aluminum armor is chemically stable at high pressure. It prevents their calcium shells from dissolving. Think about that. We humans need massive industrial plants, bauxite mines, and electricity to refine aluminum. These bugs are doing it in their guts, in the pitch dark, at freezing temperatures. They are literally wearing metal jackets to survive the crush. And they need that armor, because life down here is a contact sport. While the snailfish were solitary hunters, the amphipods are a swarm. They are the piranhas of the abyss. Because food is so rare, they have evolved to detect the scent of organic matter from miles away. When a carcass falls, a dead fish, a piece of whale blubber, or even a piece of wood, they emerge from the mud in the thousands. When we drop baited landers into the Challenger deep, camera rigs with a bag of mackerel attached, we often get footage that looks like a horror movie. Within minutes, the bait is covered, not just nibbled, buried. The amphipods pile on top of each other, forming a writhing, living mound of pale legs and antennae. They eat with terrifying speed and efficiency. They can strip a carcass to the bone in a matter of hours. They have powerful shearing mouthparts designed to tear through tough flesh and muscle, and because they never know when the next meal is coming, their stomachs can expand to accommodate incredible amounts of food. They gorge until they can barely walk, then retreat back into the mud to digest for months. In a way, they are the ultimate survivors of Earth. If a meteor hit the planet tomorrow and wiped out the surface, scorched the skies, and boiled the upper oceans, these guys wouldn't even notice. They are safe in their aluminum bunkers, eating the dust of the world, waiting for the next thing to die. It's a humbling realization. We like to think of ourselves as the masters of the planet. But if you look at the numbers, the sheer area of the ocean floor, and the resilience of these creatures, this isn't our world. It's theirs. We are just tourists visiting the roof. And speaking of tourists, we are not the first to fall this far. As we push deeper, past the domain of the supergiants, we are approaching the history books. We are about to visit the site of the most audacious, dangerous, and frankly insane exploration mission ever attempted by human beings. Check the depth, 10,900 meters. We are almost at the floor, and we are following in the wake of a gasoline-filled balloon. We are now falling through the deepest water on Earth, hovering just above the absolute bottom of the Challenger Deep. The depth gauge reads nearly 11,000 meters. It is a place of absolute solitude. But we are not the first to be here. If you look out into the darkness, you can almost see the ghost of a strange, clumsy machine drifting beside us. To understand the sheer insanity of what human beings are capable of, you have to go back to January the 23rd, 1960. That was the day two men, Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and U.S. Navy Lieutenant Don Walsh, decided to do something that was, frankly, suicidal. They climbed into a vehicle called the Trieste and pointed it down. The Trieste wasn't a submarine in the way you think of one. It was a bathyscaphe, which is basically a hot air balloon for the ocean. It consisted of a tiny, heavy steel sphere, where the people sat, hanging underneath a massive, thin-skinned tank the size of a locomotive. Here is the genius and the madness of the design. You can't use air tanks for buoyancy down here because the pressure would crush them instantly. So, Piccard filled that massive upper tank with gasoline. Why gasoline? Because gasoline is lighter than water, so it floats. But more importantly, gasoline is a liquid. And as we've discussed, liquids are virtually incompressible. Because the tank was open to the sea at the bottom, the pressure inside the gasoline tank matched the pressure of the ocean outside perfectly. It didn't need thick walls. It couldn't be crushed because it was already full. It was a brilliant physics hack. So imagine sitting in a freezing cold steel ball, dangling beneath 22,000 gallons of aviation fuel dropping into the unknown. Their descent took nearly 5 hours. 5 hours of rocking, creaking, and freezing. The Trieste had no heating system. As they descended into the cold layers we've just passed through, the temperature inside the sphere dropped to match the fridge-like conditions outside. They were shivering, eating chocolate bars to keep their energy up, watching the bioluminescence streak past the tiny, cone-shaped plexiglass window. And then, at roughly 9,000 meters, right about where we were a few minutes ago, it happened. Crack! A sound like a gunshot rang out inside the sphere. The entire vessel shuddered. Piccard and Walsh looked at each other. They checked the instruments. They checked the walls. And then they saw it. The thick plexiglass viewing window, the only thing separating them from instant death, had fractured. A hairline crack had appeared across the outer pane. Now, in any rational universe, this is the part where you abort the mission. You drop the ballast, you shoot to the surface, and you thank your lucky stars you didn't turn into a red mist. But Piccard and Walsh? They looked at the crack. They reasoned that since it hadn't shattered immediately, the pressure was holding it together. It was effectively jammed in place. So they shrugged, crossed their fingers, and kept going. It is a level of explorer nonchalance that borders on madness. They continued to fall for another 2 kilometers, watching that crack the entire way. Finally, they saw the bottom. The Trieste landed in a cloud of ivory soup, the superfine silt of the trench floor. They had touched down at 10,916 meters. They were the deepest humans in history. And then they looked out the window and saw something that would spark an argument lasting 60 years. Piccard claimed that right as they landed, he saw a flat fish, something like a sole or a flounder, about a foot long, swimming across the bottom. He described it having 2 eyes on the same side of its head. he famously radioed up, "I see a fish." This was a bombshell. A complex vertebrate living at 11,000 meters? It defied all the biological rules we just talked about regarding TMAO and protein folding. Today, most marine biologists believe Pickard was wrong. We have never seen a fish this deep since. The no-fish line at 8,200 meters has held firm in every subsequent expedition. The consensus now is that Pickard, peering through a tiny, distorted, cracked window after 5 hours of exhaustion and sensory deprivation, likely saw a sea cucumber or a strange pattern in the sediment, and his brain filled in the blanks. He wanted to see a fish, so he saw one. But whether it was a fish or a hallucination doesn't really matter. The fact is they made it. They stayed for only 20 minutes. That's it. They spent 5 hours falling, sat on the bottom for the length of a sitcom episode, and then dropped their lead weights to rocket back to the surface. When they returned, no one went back. For 52 years, the bottom of the Mariana Trench remained unvisited by humans. We went to the moon, we built a space station, we sent robots to Mars, but the Trieste's landing site remained undisturbed. Why? Because it's hard, it's expensive, and frankly, it's terrifying. It wasn't until 2012 that another human being built a machine capable of returning. And this time, it wasn't a government project or a Navy mission. It was one guy with a lot of money and a very specific obsession with the color blue. As we hover over the landing site of the Trieste, we are also floating over the footprints of James Cameron. And his dive was a very different beast. For 52 years, the bottom of the world remained empty. The dust settled over the landing site of the Trieste. The marks left by its landing skids were slowly buried by the relentless, microscopic snowfall of the abyss. The moon saw 12 humans walk on its surface. The deepest ocean saw 0. It wasn't until March 26, 2012, that the silence was broken again, and the machine that broke it looked nothing like the clumsy, gasoline-filled balloon of 1960. Drifting down through the water column now, imagine a bright lime-green torpedo, 24 feet long but thin and sleek, hanging vertically in the water like a dart aimed at the heart of the planet. This was the deep-sea Challenger. Inside the tiny steel pilot's sphere, a space so small he couldn't extend his arms or legs, was filmmaker and explorer James Cameron. This wasn't a publicity stunt. Cameron had helped design the sub himself. He spent millions of his own dollars and 7 years of secret engineering to build a vehicle that fixed the flaws of the Trieste. The Trieste was an elevator. It could go down and come up, but it couldn't really move. The Deep-Sea Challenger was a science platform. It had thrusters, cameras, 3D lighting arrays, and a robotic arm to grab rocks and critters. Or at least that was the plan. Cameron fell through the water much faster than Pickard and Walsh. His sub was designed to slice through the ocean. He plummeted into the dark, listening to the hull pop and groan as the pressure mounted. But unlike the 1960 mission, he was alone. There is a specific psychological weight to being the only human being in the deepest place on Earth. If the Trieste had imploded, Pickard and Walsh would have at least had the comfort of shared fate. If Cameron's window cracked, he would die in absolute solitude, a single speck of biology erased by the physics of the ocean. He hit the bottom at 10,908 meters. He touched down gently, kicking up the same ivory soup of fine sediment. But almost immediately, the ocean started to fight back. At these depths, the smallest flaw becomes a catastrophe. A tiny leak had developed in the hydraulic lines of the manipulator arm. The pressure forced water into the system, effectively paralyzing the robot arm. Cameron watched helplessly on his screens. He was sitting in the middle of the ultimate scientific gold mine, a place no human had touched for half a century, and he couldn't pick anything up. He couldn't grab a rock. He couldn't scoop the mud. He was reduced to being a witness. And what he witnessed was very different from Picard's fish. Cameron drove his sub across the bottom for hours. He didn't see a flatfish. He didn't see a monster. He described the landscape as lunar, a flat, desolate, featureless desert. I felt like I had literally gone to another planet and come back in one day, he later said. It was a very lunar, very desolate place. Isolated. My feeling was one of complete isolation from all of humanity. This observation is actually profound. It reinforces the reality of the Hadal zone. It isn't a crowded city like the coral reefs. It is a vast, quiet wilderness where life exists on the razor's edge of starvation. The monsters are there, the amphipods, the sea cucumbers, the worms, but they are small, hidden, and scattered. The failure of Cameron's thrusters eventually cut the dive short. He lost control of the starboard side, leaving him spinning in circles. The ocean had effectively disarmed his spaceship. He dropped his weights and rocketed back to the surface, taking nearly 70 minutes to ascend. Since 2012, technology has finally caught up. Victor Vescovo's limiting factor, now called the Bakunawa, has made repeated dives, carrying scientists and even tourists to the bottom. We are finally starting to map this place properly. But even with modern technology, the mystery remains. What exactly are those things living in the mud that Cameron couldn't pick up? Well, if we look closely at the sediment right outside our window, ignoring the plastic bags and the ghosts of explorers past, we can see something that looks like a rock, but is definitely alive. It is a single-celled organism, but it is the size of a grapefruit. If you look out the viewport at the flat, featureless grey mud, you might spot something that looks remarkably uninspiring. It looks like a dirty sponge, or maybe a clumps of wet lint that someone pulled out of a dryer filter and threw on the floor. It's lumpy, brown, and sits motionless in the silt. You might be tempted to ignore it. Don't. You are looking at one of the most biologically impossible things on planet Earth. That lump is a xenophyophore, and it is a single cell. Let that sink in for a second. In the biological world, single cells are supposed to be microscopic. They are the amoebas, the bacteria, the things you need a 400 times lens to see. But this thing? It's the size of a grapefruit. Some specimens can reach 20 centimeters across. Imagine walking down the street and seeing a human skin cell the size of a house. That is the scale of absurdity we are dealing with here. These are the largest single-celled organisms in existence, and they are found almost exclusively in the deep ocean trenches. The name xenophyophore comes from the Greek for bearer of foreign bodies. It's a perfect description because these creatures are essentially hoarders. They build their bodies, called tests, by gluing together tiny particles of sediment, sand, microscopic shells, and yes, even their own fecal pellets. They secrete a sticky, organic substance to bind all this trash together into a delicate, intricate lattice. The actual living part of the organism, the protoplasm, is a thin, slimy web that threads through this structure like a ghost in a machine. It has multiple nuclei scattered throughout its body, which allows it to grow to this gargantuan size without falling apart or losing the ability to communicate with itself. But here is the catch. They are incredibly fragile. Remember the aluminum-armored amphipods? These guys are the opposite. Their structure is so delicate that it barely holds together under its own weight. The immense pressure of the water actually helps keep them intact, pressing the sediment particles together. If a robotic arm tries to grab one, it usually disintegrates into a cloud of dust. If we try to bring one to the surface, the change in pressure and temperature turns it into a shapeless pile of mud. This makes studying them a nightmare. For decades, all we had were photos of mystery lumps on the seafloor and broken piles of sand in our nets. We barely know how they reproduce. We don't know how long they live, but we do know what they do. They are the trees of the Hadal plain. In a landscape that is flat, muddy, and boring, xenophyrophores provide the only thing that matters: structure. They are 3D apartment complexes in a 2D world. If you zoom in on one of these living rocks, you will find it teeming with guests. Tiny brittle stars, nematode worms, and copepods live inside the nooks and crannies of the xenophylophore's shell. They use it as a shelter from predators, a nursery for their eggs, and a high ground to filter feed from the current. In areas where xenophyrophores are common, the biodiversity of the surrounding mud skyrockets. They are ecosystem engineers. Just as a coral reef supports the life of the tropical ocean, these balls of glued-together poop support the life of the trenches. They also have a strange superpower. They are toxic. Analysis of the few fragments we've managed to study shows that xenophyrophores contain incredibly high concentrations of heavy metals: lead, uranium, and mercury. They seem to filter these elements out of the seawater and store them in their tests. We have no idea why. Maybe it's a byproduct of their feeding. Maybe it's a defense mechanism to stop the amphipods from eating them. Or maybe they are just the ocean's ultimate trash cans, absorbing the poisons of the world so the rest of the ecosystem doesn't have to. It's a strange thought, isn't it? The deepest life on Earth is a giant, toxic, single-celled architect that builds a house out of dust. But we can't linger on the lawn furniture. We have one final stop to make. We have seen the creatures. We have seen the trash. We have seen the history. Now we need to see the geography. We are drifting toward the deepest depression in the entire Mariana Trench. The hole within the hole. Check your depth gauge. It is reading 10,920 meters. We are about to touch the very bottom of the world. Watch the numbers on the screen. 10,920, 10,930, 10,935. Stop! The thrusters hum with a low, stabilizing reverse thrust. The descent slows, hovering, and then settles. A microscopic cloud of beige dust billows up around the skids, and then, with agonizing slowness, drifts back down. We have arrived. You are now sitting at the bottom of the Challenger Deep. Specifically, we have landed in the Eastern Pool, one of 3 distinct depressions that make up the very bottom of the trench. This is, as far as our current science can determine, the deepest point on the surface of the Earth's crust. Take a moment. Don't look at the instruments. Just feel the reality of it. You are 11 kilometers, 7 miles beneath the surface of the ocean. The column of water standing on top of your head weighs over 100 million tons. You are sitting inside a tiny bubble of air, pinned against the planet by the crushing fist of the entire Pacific Ocean. The silence here is different. It isn't just the absence of noise. It feels like a physical weight. It is a silence that has been accumulating for millions of years. The water outside your window is old. Carbon dating suggests the water in these deep trenches has been circulating in the dark for centuries, slowly creeping along the bottom from Antarctica. It is a tomb of ancient water. And the floor? Look at the sediment. It isn't the grey mud we saw on the Abyssal plain. It is finer, silkier. This is a specific type of sediment called diatomaceous ooze. It is made of the silica shells of microscopic plankton, ground down by time and pressure into a powder so fine it behaves almost like a liquid. It is the ultimate dust of the world. If you were to step out onto it, you wouldn't sink to your ankles. You might sink to your waist. It is a soft, suffocating quicksand of history. But while Cameron described this place as lunar and desolate, he was looking with human eyes. If we switch our view to a microscope, this dead mud is actually the most crowded city we have visited yet. The bottom of the Challenger Deep is a biological hot spot, but the residents are invisible. We are talking about bacteria and viruses. Recent samples taken from this mud revealed a shocking secret. The bacterial activity here is actually higher than in the abyssal plains 6 kilometers above. Why? The funnel effect. All that dead matter, all those whale carcasses, all that plastic, it all eventually slides down here. This is the compost heap of the Pacific, and ruling over this heap are the viruses. The viral density in the sediment of the Challenger Deep is staggering. Some estimates suggest there are more viruses here per cubic centimeter than anywhere else in the ocean. They are the drivers of a brutal, invisible cycle called the viral shunt. Here is how it works. Bacteria eat the organic waste. Viruses infect the bacteria and cause them to explode. Lice, releasing their nutrients back into the mud. Other bacteria eat those nutrients, and the cycle repeats. It is a closed-loop cannibalistic engine running in the dark, recycling carbon with terrifying efficiency. There is a scholarly debate raging right now about just how isolated this engine is. Some scientists argue that these trenches are carbon traps, locking greenhouse gases away forever. Others argue that this bacterial activity is so intense that it actually turns the carbon back into methane, burping it back into the ocean. We still don't know the answer. We are sitting in the middle of a planetary climate machine, and we haven't even read the manual. Visually, the scene is hypnotic. The water is crystal clear, unmoving. There are no currents strong enough to ripple the mud here. If you dropped a wrench, it would lie there, undisturbed, for 10,000 years. But there is one thing that breaks the stillness. If you look at the sonar mapping of the trench floor, you realize it isn't smooth. It is jagged. It is scarred. This is a tectonic subduction zone, remember? The ground you are parked on is technically moving. It is being shoved under the Philippines. Geologists have recorded slow earthquakes down here, seismic events that don't snap violently like the ones that destroy cities, but instead groan and grind over days or weeks. The rocks are screaming in slow motion. As you sit here, the deepest human in history, you realize the arrogance of the surface world. We map the mountains, we name the islands, we draw borders. But this silent, crushing microbial mud is the real Earth. It is indifferent to us. It doesn't care if we visit. It doesn't care if we survive. It just waits. We have touched the bottom. We have seen the dust. We have met the invisible overlords. But the ocean is vast, and the Challenger Deep is just one pocket in the trench. As we prepare to leave, we need to acknowledge what we didn't find, because for every mystery we solved tonight, the snailfish, the chemical armor, the viral mud, there are a dozen lost worlds we sailed right past. And some of them are hiding secrets that could save your life. We are sitting in the Challenger Deep, the deepest known point on Earth. But notice I said known. If you zoom out on the map, you'll see that the Mariana Trench isn't just a single smooth valley. It is a scarred, complex landscape filled with ridges, faults, and other deep basins that we have barely glanced at. Just down the road, geologically speaking, is the Sirena Deep. It's 10,714 meters deep. We've visited it a handful of times. But what about the rest? Here is a humbling statistic. We have mapped 100% of the surface of Mars, Venus, and the Moon in high resolution. We know exactly where the craters are, how high the mountains are, and what the valleys look like. You can go on Google Mars right now and fly over Olympus Mons. But here on Earth, we have mapped less than 20% of our own ocean floor to a similar resolution. That means that 80% of the planet you live on is effectively a blank space on the map. We have better charts of a planet 140 million miles away than we do of the seabed 3 miles off the coast of California. And in those blank spaces, things are happening that we can't explain. Take sound, for instance. In 1997, hydrophones placed in the Pacific Ocean by the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, picked up a sound. It was a low-frequency, ultra-powerful noise that rose rapidly in pitch. It was loud, shockingly loud. It was detected by sensors over 5,000 kilometers apart. They called it the bloop. For years, the internet went wild. The audio profile looked somewhat biological, like the call of a living creature, but it was far too loud to be a blue whale. It fueled endless conspiracy theories. Was it a giant, unknown Leviathan? Was it Cthulhu waking up? Years later, scientists confirmed that it was almost certainly an ice quake, the sound of a massive iceberg cracking and fracturing in Antarctica. But the fact that for years we legitimately didn't know if it was a rock or a monster proves just how deaf and blind we are to the deep ocean. The ocean is screaming at us, and we are only catching every 10th word. And it's not just about finding cool monsters or scary noises. The secrets hiding in these unmapped trenches could literally save your life. Remember the mud volcanoes? The bacteria living there are chemically distinct from anything on the surface. In the last few decades, scientists have started prospecting the deep sea for blue biotechnology. We are finding sponges and bacteria down here that produce chemical compounds unlike anything found in a rainforest. Why? Because down here, everything is a chemical war. Space is tight, food is scarce, and you need to defend your patch of mud. So, these microbes have evolved potent toxins and antibiotics to kill their neighbors. We have already found compounds in deep-sea sponges that can kill drug-resistant bacteria like MRSA. We have found potential cancer-fighting agents in the tissues of soft corals. The cure for the next global pandemic might be sitting in the gut of an amphipod right outside your window, but we wouldn't know it because we haven't looked. And then there is the climate question. We talked about the carbon sink of the trenches. We know the ocean absorbs a huge amount of the CO2 we pump into the atmosphere, but we don't really know how much ends up in the trenches or how long it stays there. If the trenches are a permanent trap, great. But if warming oceans change the bacterial activity down here, if that viral shunt speeds up, could these trenches turn from a carbon vault into a carbon bomb? Could they start releasing methane? We don't know. We are running a global climate experiment without checking the pressure valve at the bottom of the tank. It is the great paradox of our time. We are obsessed with looking up. We spend billions building telescopes to find life on distant moons, looking for biosignatures in the atmosphere of exoplanets. We want to know if we are alone. But looking out your viewport at the viral mud of the Challenger Deep, you realize we aren't alone. We are sharing a tiny blue life raft with millions of species we haven't met yet. We are standing in the middle of a library of biological history, and we've only read the dust jacket of the first book. There are other trenches. The Tonga Trench, the Philippine Trench, the Kermadec Trench. Most of them have never seen a human eye. They are lost worlds, right here on Earth, separated by thousands of miles of abyssal plain, evolving in secret for eons. Who knows what else has figured out a way to cheat the pressure? Who knows what other no-fish lines have been broken in a trench we haven't found yet? But our time here is up. The batteries are draining. The oxygen scrubbers are working overtime. The physics of this place is patient, but it isn't forgiving. You cannot stay in the underworld forever. Reaching forward, you flip the safety cover on the drop weights switch. This is it. The return ticket. The electromagnets disengage. Two massive steel plates, weighing hundreds of pounds, fall away from the sub and sink silently into the diatomaceous ooze. Freed from their weight, the buoyancy of the syntactic foam takes over. The sub shudders. The mud outside the window slips downward. We are falling up. There is a sudden lurch as the weights fall away, leaving their indentations in the history of the mud below. Gravity, which has been pulling us down for hours, suddenly loses its grip. Buoyancy takes over. The deep-sea Challenger, or the Trieste, or the limiting factor, whichever ghost ship we are riding tonight, begins to rocket upward. The ascent is always faster than the descent. We are falling up. Watch the depth gauge. The numbers are scrolling down so fast they blur. 10,000 meters. 9,000 meters. We fly past the invisible chemical barrier that keeps the snailfish trapped in the basement. We leave the aluminum-armored amphipods to their darkness. The hull begins to speak again. Groan. Ping. It's the reverse of the sound we heard on the way down. As the immense pressure lifts, the titanium sphere is expanding. The metal is relaxing, stretching back to its original shape by microscopic fractions of an inch. It's a sigh of relief from the machine, a signal that the crushing hand of the ocean is letting go. We streak through the pitch-black water of the midnight zone. We pass the sperm whales hunting in the dark, the giant squids fighting their eternal wars, and the silent floating cities of the siphonophores. We are moving too fast to see them now. They are just shadows in the slipstream. 5,000 meters. 4,000 meters. We blast past the depth of the Titanic. The air inside the sphere starts to feel different. It gets colder before it gets warmer, the chill of the deep steel finally soaking through to the air. But you know the warmth is coming. 1,000 meters. The twilight zone. And then you see it. It starts as the faintest suggestion of a color. A shift from absolute black to a deep charcoal indigo. It is the sun. After hours of total sensory deprivation, that faint dying light looks like a supernova. The blue brightens. It shifts from navy to royal, then to the electric crystal turquoise of the surface. The bioluminescence fades, washed out by the power of the star we orbit. 200 meters, 100 meters. The calm of the deep is gone. You start to feel the motion again. The sub begins to rock. The chaotic energy of the waves, the wind, and the weather grabs the hull. It feels violent, almost nauseating, after the cathedral-like stillness of the trench. And then, whoosh! We break the surface. Foam washes over the viewport. The sphere bobs aggressively in the swell. Your eyes sting. Even through the thick acrylic, the tropical sun is blindingly bright. It feels aggressive. The world up here is loud, chaotic, and bright. The radio crackles to life, human voices asking for status checks. The mechanical whine of the A-frame crane preparing to pluck you out of the water. You pop the hatch. The humid, salty air rushes in. It smells of diesel and algae. It smells of life. As you climb out of the hatch and stand on the top deck of the sub, swaying in the Pacific swell, you look out at the horizon. It looks exactly the same as when you left. The blue water stretches endlessly to the sky. The clouds are fluffy and white. The birds are diving. But you are different. You look down at the water lapping against the hull, and you know what lies beneath it. You know that this blue surface is just a thin, deceptive wrapper. You know that right under your feet, just a few miles down, is a world of eternal night, of crushing pressure, of gelatinous monsters and aluminum bugs and viral mud. We call this planet Earth, named after the dirt we stand on. But that is a vanity project. We live on an island of dry land in a world that is ocean. The real Earth is dark, cold, and under extreme pressure. The real Earth is the home of the snailfish and the cucumber. We are the outliers, clinging to the dry crust, huddled under the sun, blissfully unaware of the silent, heavy majority of our planet. We have traveled to the deepest point, the Challenger Deep. We have challenged the pressure, the cold, and the dark. And we have returned. But a part of you, the part that stared into the black and saw the stars of bioluminescence, the part that felt the silence of the 11th kilometer, will never really leave. You have seen the basement of the world, and you know that down there, in the dark, the Earth is watching, waiting, and teeming with life that doesn't need us, doesn't know us, and will outlast us. Welcome back to the surface. Try not to squint.